Okay, thank you. It's 7:02 PM, and I'm calling the August 15th, 2023 Planning Board meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded. Our first order of business, as usual, is roll call, so when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton,
Present.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Rick Mitchell,
Present.
Matt Hamill,
Present.
and Marnie Crouch, present. The first item on our agenda is a site plan review for a location at 264 Bay Road. The applicant is architect Brian Stein on behalf of his client Mingo Springs LLC. And the application is to remove an existing 16 by 24-foot shed and construct a 23 by 24-foot shed in the same location on the site with a larger footprint. The property is within the business district, and per the assessor's maps, it's located
Recording in progress.
on map 33, lot 231. The new shed will be used for storage for SLC Interiors, which operates a business at 264 Bay Road. Patrick, can you confirm for me that this application was properly noticed in accordance with our bylaws?
It was properly noticed. We have the fee from the applicant. We did have this posted in the Salem Evening News for 2 consecutive weeks as well.
Thank you very much. I have studied the application, and I understand where the shed is located. And I personally don't have any questions for the applicant, but I invite any board members who might have some questions to take this opportunity to ask them now. Is Brian Stein with us via Zoom, or?
I am.
Hi there.
How are you, Marnie?
Very well, thank you. Welcome. Kind of a
Thank you.
different,
It's been a while.
yeah. So does anyone have any questions for Brian Stein?
This is not really a change of use either, right? The same establishment
Correct.
is going to use it? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you have been by it, but, the shed is pretty tired in the rear of the property. I mean, I see it every day. My office is, basically next to it, and it's just tired, and she wants a new shed and a cleaner space to store products for their interior design business.
Brian, I have a question for you. I see 2 different names for the building, studio and storage shed. Can you clarify that?
The surveyor forgot to take studio off and put storage shed on it. I apologize for that. We had done a previous application to the zoning board a few months ago when she had a different thought in mind, and that's been pulled, and we're back for a shed.
Okay, good. Just the exterior elevations look more like a studio than a storage shed.
Yeah, it's just it's a nice shed. Sees it every day from the backside of her office, and she's very particular about how she wants things to look. So it can't just be a normal storage shed. It needs to look like a nice building, which,
So the question, I guess, for me is, it's not open to the public, is that correct?
No.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
No, their office is obviously, but not the storage shed.
Yeah.
Will the shed have any plumbing in it,
No.
but electricity?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Just 2 other quick ones. The coverage is nowhere near what that's not in violation of the zoning reg for the business district. I guess 75%.
No.
So you're nowhere close to that. Okay.
No.
And the setbacks, I guess you figure just grandfathered in because of the old shed on the rear,
Well, there are no setbacks in the business district. It's determined under site plan review, but we actually,
in the rear yard.
side yards, we meet, like a typical residential setback. The rear, we wouldn't, but it doesn't now.
That abuts the railroad tracks, doesn't it, in any event?
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. Does anyone else have any questions for Brian? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the application.
Question from the audience?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Please, to the podium and state your name and address.
Yes, my name is Jim Kresser. We own the buildings at 248 and 254 Bay Road. We have no issue with what Suzanne wants to do. As Brian said, it will be a lovely building. The questions I have, thanks to this gentleman, got answered. So there'll be no plumbing in the building. It won't be open to the public. I'm assuming that this is slab on grade, that there's no basement under the building,
Correct.
okay? It's one story only,
Correct.
okay? And other than that, the only question I guess I have is, you're probably familiar, most of you, with the fact that Honeycomb is next door. It's a very busy parking lot, and I don't know what, if any, arrangements are going to be made for a dumpster on site for construction vehicles and equipment and the kind of resulting chaos that that could entail. So that's a question, I guess, more than anything else.
Yeah, we haven't fully finalized the logistics plan, but I can see a dumpster being located in one of her designated spots, or the SLC's designated spots for hopefully a relatively short time, given this is a relatively small project. And then obviously construction vehicles, we can certainly have, hopefully most park off-site, or have her staff park off-site while construction's going on.
Okay. So the only other comment I guess I would make, the original site plan permit for this property from 2006 contains language in condition 1 regarding the use of the existing shed. And my only suggestion would be that that language be incorporated in your decision. And it says very simply, the existing shed at the rear of the property may be used for storage purposes only. The shed may not be used for retail or business functions or services. And that's all I have.
Do you have any objection to that condition, Brian?
No, because it's literally a storage shed. So yeah, there will not be clients of theirs out there, purchasing product or anything like that. It's literally to store their products. And they have a ton of beautiful fake flowers they use in photo shoots and whatnot. So it'll be for that and other products.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions for Brian? Okay, at this juncture, then, I will entertain a motion to approve the application.
Are you making the motion with the inclusion of the statement from the original special permit?
It was site plan review, inclusion
site
of
re-
the condition.
Site plan review, yes, yeah.
Do
So
I have a
moved.
second?
I'll second it.
I'll take a roll call vote. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Patrick, may I assume that you'll prepare the requisite paperwork, and I'll be happy to sign it when it's completed? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Okay, the second item on our agenda is one that we have been talking about since October, at least October of 2022, and that is the strategic plan for the rezoning of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And tonight, planning board members and members of the public have a draft of the overlay district. It is dated August 15th, 2023. And annexed to the draft bylaw are the maps and tables that have been referenced in various drafts prior to this one. So this is the complete package. I cannot represent to you that this is the final version, but we are closer now than we have ever been. So I want to take this opportunity of just running through the text of the bylaw in hopes that my remarks will enlighten the members present here and as well as those on Zoom. I want to note that a bylaw is really a legal document. It governs the development of a site. All its provisions have importance. They wouldn't be in the bylaw if they were irrelevant. So I think that's one thing to note. The other is the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary site is a complex one. It's 102 acres. It has residential structures. It has a chapel. It has student classrooms. It has offices. It has a very large library. It has historic buildings. So its development is not as straightforward as it would be if it was vacant land, or it just had one use, but there are multiple uses there now. And so I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit and note that in section 9.6.1.3, with apologies for the numbering, applicability, the Browns Hill Overlay District eliminates the underlying zoning, and that's R1B, single-family zoning on 1 acre. And legally, to do that, to make that effective, we have to allow certain as-of-right uses on the property. In other words, if there were no as-of-right uses on the property, then we could not eliminate the underlying zoning. So the planning board, as one of its first decisions, unanimously voted to eliminate the underlying zoning. And the underlying zoning could, under a reasonable scenario, result in the use of the site for single-family houses. It would undoubtedly involve the demolition of all the buildings and more likely than not demolition of much of the existing landscaping. So the planning board determined that that was not the highest and best use of the property and would have the least value to the town in terms of revenue generation. So that's just a preliminary. So I'm going to just run through the different provisions, and I'm not going to read them, but I'm just going to highlight them. So the first section, as is normal with bylaws, is its purpose. And generally, the bylaw is intended to govern the development of this property in a cohesive and orderly fashion using different zoning tools. And those zoning tools are as of right, site plan review, and special permits. And this bylaw, as one of its purposes, encourages the use of illustrative plans. And if an applicant were to come to the planning board and use one of the illustrative plans that Jonathan Poor and Emil Dahlquist have spent many, many hours preparing, their application for a special permit would be abbreviated. So in Purpose 6, the bylaw sets forth those findings that would be deemed to be satisfied. And when we get there, I will indicate what those are. In addition to that, there's a special design process that's set forth in this bylaw that would apply to any applicant who elected not to use the illustrative plan. And when we get to that special design process, I will highlight its importance as well. So the abbreviated special permit presumes that the special design process has been satisfied, and it enables an applicant to have certain findings deemed to be satisfied as well. And that's why it's denominated an abbreviated special permit process. And again, the idea is to encourage the use of the illustrative plans because they have been thought through carefully to address the intensity of development on the site and also to respect open space. And those illustrative plans also have been informed by the work product of Barry Abramson and David Gamble, because in their materials, they indicated what uses on the site were most likely, given the economic climate, and which uses would be least likely to occur. So, for example, they determined that office space is not something where there's any demand today, and that life science or any kind of commercial activity like New England Biolabs is quote-unquote user-driven. So the illustrative plans did not focus on those particular uses because they seem to be the least likely to happen on the site. And that's understandable because the infrastructure there is entirely dependent on the existing wastewater treatment centers, system rather. And so for any larger scale development, that might pose an obstacle. So Section 2 of the bylaw is just an indication of how it should be interpreted in the event there any ambiguity. As I mentioned, the third section, applicability, this bylaw does eliminate the underlying R1B zoning, and then the bylaw does indicate that the planning board is the special permit granting authority. And the second major section of the bylaw identifies the various districts that I'm sure you're familiar with because they are set forth in the map, the governing map that Emil and Jonathan have presented to us on numerous occasions. And Table 1 then contains a synopsis of each of those districts. And one can peruse them, but for each district in Table 1, the character of the district is identified and the maximum build-out requirements are summarized. And then turning to allowable uses, we also have a table that sets forth the uses that are permitted on this property. Now, under zoning law, if a use is not permitted, if it's not specifically identified as something that can take place on the site, then it's prohibited. So if a use isn't listed, it's not allowed. So in other words, there's no industrial development on the site because we didn't list it as a use. There's no marijuana dispensary on the site because we didn't list it as a use. And there could be other examples. So Table 2 is fairly self-explanatory. And then the remaining sections in this, sections 9.6.2, address potential uses for the retreat house, Pilgrim Hall, and the gatehouse, as well as accessory uses for those buildings. And then in section 9.6.3, application requirements generally. And we have now tables that set forth what uses are as of right and what uses are subject to the abbreviated special permit and what uses require a special permit. So the as of right uses, which are, I think, of most concern to the abutters, are the reuse of the existing dormitories plus 10% additional square footage, and that really is an estimate of what would be needed to put in elevators or make them handicapped accessible. And we also have determined that as of right reuse of the existing buildings on Browns Hill itself are subject to as-of-right development plus an additional 10% square footage. And then because the Retreat House, Pilgrim Hall, and the Gatehouse have some significant historical value and really are hallmarks of the site and its campus organization, we've permitted their reuse as of right. We wanted to have those historic buildings saved by encouraging their reuse, and as a consequence, we've made their reuse as of right. And as I said before, the abbreviated special permit applies to the use of one or more of the illustrative plans that we'll review later. And then the special permit process then applies to any development that is untethered to an illustrative plan. So that would be a developer comes in and has to create its own concept plan for what it wants to do on the site. And as we'll see later, that is subject to various and sundry normal constraints that are typical in bylaws. So, we have some more boilerplate provisions that I don't think should detain us. We have provided that site plan review will be applicable, and site plan review can pertain to as-of-right uses. So site plan review generally doesn't permit the denial of an application, but it does permit the planning board to encourage conditions for different uses. So it's not a prohibition about what can take place there, but it's an opportunity for the planning board to ask questions and encourage better design if that's applicable. And we just saw a very short and sweet example of site plan review with respect to the shed behind the building on Bay Road. So, as should be evident by now, this is a hybrid bylaw. So by hybrid, I mean there's the potential to use one of the illustrative plans, or alternatively, a developer can come in and create its own concept plan. However, the districts that we have identified pertain to both options. So I clarified with John Witten, who is assisting us with the legal aspects of this, that a concept plan can be circumscribed by the districts that we have identified, and those are all, as I said, set forth in Table 1. So if an applicant elects to produce its own concept plan, then it has to adhere to the special design process. And that process begins with the identification of protected areas, and those protected areas include regulated conservation areas and unregulated conservation areas. And the applicant has to identify and delineate on a map those regulated and unregulated conservation areas. And the unregulated conservation areas include unprotected natural landscape features such as steep slopes and wildlife corridors and that type of thing. And the second step is the identification and delineation of the proposed development area. And again, that has to be delineated on a map. And then the third step is the location of the buildings or dwelling units, and then also roads and trails and lotting. And the specifics of what is required is all set forth in the bylaw. But that special design process is intended to ensure that the development is integrated into the site instead of being imposed upon it. And then we turn to different standards. And the standards are different if an applicant elects to use an illustrative plan or to create its own concept plan. So with that said, there are still things that have to happen, regardless of whether an applicant uses an illustrative plan or creates its own concept plan. And use of illustrative plan does require the production of a concept plan. So the terminology, I admit, can be a little confusing if you don't pay close attention. But all applicants have to attend a pre-application conference. They have to comply with the actual application process. And they have to, I apologize for having to take my glasses off. They have to satisfy the planning board's findings for special permits. So this is what an applicant using an illustrative plan has to do. All applicants have to attend the pre-application conference and whatnot, but the abbreviated special permit process, the applicant using an illustrative plan still has to satisfy different planning board findings governing the mitigation to abutting land by reason of air or water pollution, noise, dust, or vibrations, and stormwater runoff. They have to establish that there's safe and convenient access to the site. They have to establish adequate capacity for public services, including water pressure and sewer capacity. And they have to also satisfy the planning board as to the use of energy savings and environmentally friendly building techniques. So if an applicant elects to create a concept plan based on the illustrative plan, they also have to satisfy the design standards that are applicable to the use of a concept plan created without reference to an illustrative plan with respect to just a few provisions. And they include lighting, signage, parking, tree preservation and landscaping, stormwater management, and the location of service areas, loading docks, mechanical and solar equipment. So even though there's an abbreviated special permit process, it doesn't eliminate all requirements. Now, turning to the use of a concept plan untethered to an illustrative plan, there are numerous provisions that must be satisfied. And these provisions are intended to protect abutters, and they're also intended to help make sure that the development on the site is cohesive. So we have provisions dealing with perimeter buffers, landscape buffers, and the use of different structural elements such as privacy walls or fences. We also have open space requirements. And just as an aside, I want you to know that many of these provisions are not unique to this bylaw. They are culled from our existing bylaws. So with respect to the amount of space that an applicant would have to set aside, the reference is to the existing senior housing bylaw. So a developer using a concept plan without reference to the illustrative plan would have to set aside a minimum of 15% of the gross acreage for open space. And then we have provisions for the location of the open space and how it should be contiguous, and the type of open space that can be used. We have provisions for lighting. We want to make sure that all lighting is dark sky compliant, and we want to make sure that lighting fixtures on the site are compatible so that one development doesn't have some extremely contemporary lighting fixtures on its portion of the site and someone else has something that's very, very traditional. So we're trying to make sure that the site itself, when it's finally built out, has some cohesiveness in terms of lighting, street lighting in particular, and as well as parking lot lighting. We've addressed pedestrian walkway lighting and building and security lighting. with respect to thoroughfares, John Witten, who's assisting us, indicated that because their existing roadways are private, that the bylaw should provide that the town would not be responsible for them, and we should make clear that those roads would remain private. In the draft that you have before you, I had indicate that the select board policy on converting private streets into public ways would apply, but he advised that we should indicate that this existing streets and any newly constructed roads would all remain private. So table 6-1 contains the thoroughfare metrics in terms of how, and Emil will talk about this, how the roadways would operate in terms of being two-way or one-way, or whether there would be parking on different roadways. And then table 6.2 is the amount of parking that's required, and that is drawn from a model bylaw that's produced by the Commonwealth. And again, we have provisions for sidewalks, signage, tree preservation, and landscaping, which is very important, not just for the benefit of the development on the site, but to the abutters. And so we want to make sure that there's a landscape plan, and we have general standards with respect to landscaping and landscaping of parking lots in particular, so that, and also provisions for street trees. So we want the site to be well-screened from the abutters to the extent feasible. And again, we have provisions on stormwater management. We're essentially saying that Chapter 29 of the General Hamilton bylaw applies. And as you may or may not know, the Planning Board is revising Chapter 29 rather, of the Hamilton General Bylaw, specifically to address the houses that are being constructed on Bridge Street as we speak. And then finally, we have some provisions for service areas and mounted solar systems and that type of thing. But the most important thing with respect to the use of a concept plan that is untethered to an illustrative plan are the dimensional standards that are set forth in Table 7, and Emil will discuss that. And then turning to some of the more general topics, we have the requirement of a pre-application conference, as I mentioned, and then the application process itself. And that really requires just what you would expect. I mean, a concept plan has to be prepared. It has to be prepared by someone competent to do it. It has to have a title block, the location of the proposed development, the size in acres, and various things that would enable the planning board to really understand what is being proposed. And so those requirements are all set forth. Then we have a number of general provisions. One is that once an application is filed, I mean, there can be no disruption of the site or disturbance of the site while the application is pending. There's a provision for the employment of outside consultants, and we address the applicability of the inclusionary housing bylaw as well as the senior housing bylaw. And so a number of provisions of the senior housing bylaw are not applicable here, in particular the cap on the number of senior housing, 55-plus housing in town, and things of that nature. And then what is most important to everyone, I think, are the findings that the planning board would have to make. And that is, and I think I'll read these because I think this is what most people are interested in. The proposed development is compatible with adjacent land uses. The proposed development mitigates impact to abutting land and natural resources by reason of the location of buildings or dwellings units in relation to one another and to abutters. The proposed development mitigates impact to abutting land and natural resources by reason of air or water pollution, noise, dust, vibration, or stormwater runoff. The proposed development provides safe and convenient access for the site, to the site from existing or proposed roads and to proposed structures thereon with reference to pedestrian and vehicular safety, traffic flow and control, and access in case of fire or emergency. The proposed development provides safe and convenient access within the site and to proposed structures thereon with reference to pedestrian and vehicular traffic, traffic flow and control, and access in case of fire or emergency. And the next finding is the proposed development provides for adequate capacity for public services, facilities, and utilities to service the proposed development, such as water pressure and sewer capacity. The proposed development provides for visual and noise buffering of the development to minimize impact to abutting properties. The proposed development provides for the perpetual preservation and maintenance of open space, trails, and recreation areas. The applicant has demonstrated compliance with the special design process that is set forth in 9.6.4.5, and the proposed development, to the extent feasible, incorporates energy-saving and environmentally friendly building techniques. So the abbreviated special permit process provides that findings 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, and 9 are satisfied. And so I think if you were to go through the bylaw, you would see how that takes place. And then finally, the remaining provisions are quite mundane, and I don't think needs to detain us. And at this point, I will ask Emil to just review the tables that he prepared, I think, starting with Table 4 and Table 5 and those
Excuse
tables.
me.
And at that point, after that, I think the planning board should have an opportunity to discuss this a bit, and then I will let the members of the public have their say. But I also want to have another discussion about where we are in this process and how it is that we will go forward.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I just would like to interject just a general comment to help frame what folks are listening to and looking at,
Oh, sure.
which is the building of this involves a number of stages, starting with kind of the framework of the bones of how this thing is organized, and then fleshing out the content of the sections, and then coordinating that content with the visuals and the tables, so that they both have the same content, and then refining that content. There's a lot of checking, cross-checking. And then the last thing is I'll call navigation, which is coordinating numbers and references and whatnot, and putting it in a framework, or putting it in a format that's easy to follow. And what I would just caution folks is that it's not quite there yet. The navigability is still in process. So here and there's going to be discrepancies in, numbers or page sequencing or things like that, and that it's a work in progress. And it's helpful to understand that folks are working independently, but on one document. So it's not like, that coordination can happen easily. So I
Right.
just want to temper what folks are looking at here.
Right, and just to explain, I mean, there are numerous iterations here because of just that issue that Jonathan raised. We have open meeting laws so that we are prohibited from, as a planning board, getting together and hashing this all out and coming up with a document that's like ready to go. We have to proceed in these awkward incremental steps, developing the bylaw as we go along in response to questions and concerns. And we've sought in, I particularly, because I'm responsible for the language portion of this bylaw to a large extent, requested input from planning board members, and we've studied not just our town bylaw, but I've looked at bylaws that address certain issues from other really reputable planners. So we've really tried to be thoughtful in this, and I can assure you that we've studied the whole notion of this draft overlay district since October, starting with an analysis of spot zoning and looking at legal issues and what should be in a development agreement and how this all should be put together. So it's been a learning process for the planning board, and I know it's a learning process for the public, and I can understand because they're not, it's so incremental that it can be confusing as it evolves. And I would apologize for that, but I don't see any way around it. I just don't know how we could have done it differently to keep working on something that still needs the i's crossed, the i's dotted and the t's crossed. See, all these little mistakes can crop in, and so it's really a hard task to go through. And when I was reviewing this bylaw for this evening, I actually did just a proofread on the captions of the different sections, and I thought, these can be improved. So I'm always tweaking this document when I see things that I think can be improved. And that's what's happening. We go through it and I say, this can be better. I can make this more consistent. With that, I'll turn it over to Emil, because as Jonathan noted, I mean, we're not working together on this. We get pieces and then they have to fit together. And
Before that, and following your comments, will we get an opportunity to go through this with our comments tonight?
Absolutely. And, but I do want to, and this is, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we need to think about where we are in terms of going to town meeting, because we have reached a stage where this is, the planning board can continue working on this diligently. I mean, we've really stepped on the gas for this, but we have not had significant input from the seminary, and we have had no input from the select board with respect to what we've been doing. And so in communication with John Whitten, we have to assess where we are and where we're going. Because the object here is to have this overlay district approved at town meeting, and there may be some question about that, and I really don't want to get ahead of myself on that.
We understood, but we need to present to the public and to the select board and to other institutions, including the seminary, a final draft document. So gets to my question is, so tonight, once Emil's finished his presentation, then we can go through this page by page, line by line, with questions and
Well, I
comments.
guess that's the issue, whether we should continue having this as a final document prior to having some more substantial feedback from the seminary. Because, but again, we'll have that discussion momentarily.
Well,
Maybe I can answer, Rick. This will be the first time we have all the pieces together.
No, I got that. That's
And
why
so
that's why I'm anxious.
We're not anticipating anything new, but
The seminary has becomes, I think the seminary is ghosting us, quite frankly.
Well, thank you for that, because that's the topic.
I don't
that-
even see them appearing tonight, so
Right.
my assumption is that they have stepped back and have decided not to participate. We asked them for multiple times for comments, and as far as I know, we have not received any
None.
detailed comments. So it's quite clear that the seminary has chosen to do something else. We don't know what. So
Well, we did have their proposal 2 weeks ago, such as it is.
That was a slap in the face.
No, it was a completely realistic proposal.
No,
I'm not sure
it
that
was
we agree
not.
with it.
It
Could
was
I-
not. It
Could I
was not.
propose, Madam Chair, could I propose that we allow the presentation to complete
Right,
itself,
I
and then
would
we,
like
and then
to
we embark
just-
on this
All right.
conversation?
Well, okay, so once we finish that, then we can get back to this discussion.
Absolutely.
Right,
Okay.
right. I think that's important, so.
Okay.
I share a
But I think, from going through this, I think, Rick, you can see that although this is by no means the final draft, and there's, work to be done, it's now a complete package,
No, I got that.
ready to,
I spent 2.5 hours today going through it line by line as a complete package, so I'd like, and I have numerous questions and comments, so I'd like to have that opportunity to make those.
okay. Emil?
Thank you. I'm going to, this really is a two-part code, as Marnie suggested. There's the written part, but the thing that makes this a little different from other town codes is that there's a graphic part to it. So it's a combination of data, tables, plans, like you see here, and a written document about all the particulars that go into writing a code. It makes this unique in some respects, but the closer you examine this, the more you realize that nothing is going to be introduced here that isn't already in our codes now in some form. So we're essentially taking something and being proactive about creating a project that we think is appropriate for the town of Hamilton, as well as for the seminary. This is a familiar drawing if you've followed any of the past proceedings. It's the Browns Hill District map. It was an early decision that was based on preferences. The board went through a workshop and established, in looking at the site, we did a site assessment. What is it about the site? What features does it have that we feel should be preserved or somehow incorporated in the bylaws so that they can be used in a design or in a concept plan? And the result of that was this district map. So there are 8 different districts. This is colored, and Browns Hill is at the top, just for orientation. On the right-hand side of that is Bridge Street. Woodbury is on the bottom of that, and Essex on the left-hand side of the drawing. The red buildings that are shown there are the historic buildings. So the decision was to use the preferences of the planning board, which we voted on and approved as a planning board. We decided that the significance of the historic landscape, the green part right in the center where the retreat house is a very special landscape, a very special place. It is acknowledged in Essex County for its beauty, and we thought that was worth preserving for several reasons as a large open space. So the whole purpose of what we did in going through the site assessment was to establish what areas can be developed on the site without losing any of the preferences established. And I can list the preferences, but the trails, the buffering is important to us around the perimeter of the site. The open space in the heritage landscape is very important to the board. Preservation of historic buildings and reuse if possible, and so forth. So we did come up with a series of roughly 10 or so very important preferences, again, that were used to fabricate these illustrative plans. So this is a district map, which is the regulating map here on this particular overlay district. It is the one that's used to orient where different types of activities will occur over time and how you're supposed to do them in relation to what Marty was going over in the text part. These are all PDFs, so I'm going to have to try to zoom in here. So this is the table 1, and these are all inserted in Marnie's document in the overlay district according to, in a specific order relating to the adjacent text or the text adjacent to it. This is descriptions of the planned districts. And again, the 8 districts are listed on the left-hand side, beginning with the top with Browns Hill, residential, commercial, and so forth. a brief description of a character in the center column, and on the right is the build-out requirements. So this is where there, if you want a quick overview, how much is allowed and where is it, and what is the size of it, this is the chart to go to, because each district has those maximums. And the thing that the planning board has to do now is evaluate these. This is a summation of the illustrative plans. It's a calculation of everything that was created in those plans. So this is a result of the plans. So the board now has to decide at this stage if these change or if they stay. And you can see the districts down at the bottom. The NA district, natural area, is a no-build area. Those are steep slopes, heavily wooded, and so forth. Utility expansion, the UE, is accounting for wastewater treatment on the site, anticipating it's going to be expanded and improved and possibly even used at the top of the hill. So that's what that particular table 1 is. Table 2 is allowable uses. Currently, the underlying zone is 1 acre residential housing, single-family housing. 1 use on the site. Right, the board went through anticipating, this is again based on a lot of the consultants' work, based on what is anticipated there in terms of residential and business, to decide, well, what would be an as-of-right and what would be a special permit. The Ps are permitted, that's as of right, the trail system on the top, for example, under recreation, education, public assembly, as of right. Everything else, conference, library, studio, special permit, and would be part of that special permit process.
Emil, can I interrupt for just a
Yeah.
second? Because I think it's an important slide to look at when you recognize the Ps versus the SPs. And I think it does a nice job of addressing both the concerns of the seminary and of
Yeah,
the public,
sure,
in that
yeah.
their preference being the permitted reuse of dormitories,
Yeah.
and everyone else's concern on what else could happen otherwise. And the what else could happen otherwise is governed by the special permit process, and
Correct.
maybe a more, finer look into what's being proposed. Nothing's allowed. Nothing's allowed without following that special permit process. So
Yeah, the
a
special
high bar to
permit,
jump over. I think it's,
Yeah.
again, it's just it's an important slide to look at
sure.
when you take that into consideration.
Yeah, thank you.
Which are the abbreviated versus the special permit? That's what I can't tell that delineation from this
It's not
chart.
set
We,
forth in here.
It's not.
we
yeah.
took that off because it was confusing. The abbreviated was confusing. We had an SP1 and an SP2. We felt that that would be more confusing in the end, that the wording could better be handled in the text
In
part of it.
table 3, too.
In table 3, which is coming up next table.
Sorry.
So, yeah, and I don't want to go through all of these, because I know we want to get through discussions, but we have main categories, residential. We decided actually no single-family housing on the site. This is trying to provide the town of Hamilton something different from what it's used to, but not so different that it's massive apartment buildings. We wanted to come up with a scale. The scale was very important on this site, and so we wanted to do multiplex types of housing that would be no larger than an estate house, for example, here in Hamilton. So we had the residential there, all would be special permit, 2-family dwellings. In each of the areas on the top, you go, the top row, beginning on the left, is Plan District Browns Hill, then it goes to the north residential where the E and F dormitories are, the central zone, the central residential commercial, and the stables, which is the Pilgrim Hall area. SD is the south development, those are the 2 dormitories, A and B. HL, again, is pretty much a no-build area, UE, no-build, and NA areas. So we did expand quite a bit, the potential uses, but they're all by special permit. They are to be examined by the board based on evaluation criteria to determine whether it satisfies or does not satisfy the codes. So this is not as of right. As Marnie was saying, Table 3A here, the as-of-rights parts are reuse of existing dormitories plus 10% additional square footage, reuse of existing institutional office residential space plus 10% additional square footage, reuse of the retreat house, Pilgrim Hall, and the gatehouse. That would be the as-of-right extended to the seminary on the site, at least as of right now. Table 3B, the abbreviated special permit, concept plans using one or more illustrative plans 1 through 4 is the abbreviated special permit. And along with that comes the responsibility or onus of meeting the illustrative plan configuration and dimensions and so forth. That will be set forth in future tables here. And then special permit on the bottom, concept plans, this is something other than the illustrative plans. For new construction plus reuse of dormitories and reuse of existing institutional office residential space in excess of 10% additional square footage. So pretty much everything other than existing buildings will be in a special permit category. And again, this represents a slight change from the past, just to kind of clarify some of the questions from the public. And a concern from the seminary is one of the few questions they had about that. Table 4, building type standards. Now, what we decided to do was to, this is sort of a hybrid, it's a form-based code, and what I mean by that is that the decision is that physical form is at least as important as use in this site. And by physical form, I mean the placement of buildings, I mean the placement of roads, width of sidewalks, where parking is, where the open space is in relation to the dwelling units and so forth. That's all part of the physical development. Now, if you go to conventional coding on this site, what they would do is say you have to have a certain setback around the entire site of so many feet, and it can, all your buildings can be so many feet tall and stories. So they essentially say you can have a box within your property, and within that you can do whatever you like in terms of building size, location, streets. You can do anything you want as a developer. That's it. What form-based does is say, no, we're gonna turn that around. We're gonna make this more prescriptive. We're gonna say, this is where you would like to, this is where we would like you to have this project built in this manner, in this location, of this size. That's what you're gonna see in the illustrative plans, which still allow, to me anyway, a lot of flexibility for developers to be more creative. They are not design drawings in the sense that we're saying that what you need to do is build colonial houses of whatever detail you feel appropriate, but it's not at all about those types of things, even materials. There are no architectural guidelines associated with this, which would be a next step. And a lot of communities do adopt that as a next step to further elaborate on this. But this is mostly grappling with the positioning of buildings, their proximity to each other, the spaces between them, their location in relation to open space, and so on. It effectively deals with how buildings and dwelling units especially address the public realm being streets and sidewalks. That is something that's completely missing in all conventional zoning. You do not see that relationship anywhere. And that's a big difference here. So the decision on this board was to use this approach, this form-based approach, to create illustrative plans as an abbreviated method for developers to come in and sort of streamline the approval process, to go through an approval if they follow the drawings. If they choose to go in a different direction, they can do that, but they have to go through the regular special permitting process, which is long, nothing guaranteed for the developer, and it's a much longer and riskier process. So this is an attempt to reach out. Because there is no concept plan, the seminary does not have one. We decided to be proactive as a community and create our own one based on meetings with the public, based on work done by the consultants earlier on, create a plan that we felt, and then test it with you folks in the public about size or intensity. Is this what you would anticipate seeing there in this particular location. That was the toughest thing to grapple with, how much is too much on this site. And I think we came up with a pretty good position on this. But this particular back here, the building type standards, what's important about this one is the building types on the left-hand side. You have to organize your thinking on the site using either building types, street types, or locations on the site. Locations didn't make a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. Building types, for us, seemed to be the most appropriate because most of them were kind of limited to residential, some commercial possibilities on the top of the hill, or even the bottom of the hill and so forth. So we decided to organize everything by building types. That, again, is important because now you can relate these building types to lots, to locations, and to create a denser, more compact development that's walkable, more attractive, and has all of those features to it that I think a town would like. Down at the bottom are the existing historic buildings, the Retreat, Pilgrim Hall, and its accessory garage, and the gatehouse. Those are the historic buildings that we would hope could get renovated or rehabilitated into something that would be useful for the site and to preserve the historic nature of, a remnant of Hamilton's past. Would be kind of neat to save that. Now we get down into the nitty-gritty, the allowable form standards. Again, this is a lot of data in here, but the form standards are, again, this is the thing that I was talking about on how you establish where those buildings ought to be on the site. Now, the important thing here is that this gives the town predictability. If you follow a chart like this, you can be almost absolutely certain this is the way it's going to happen in the site because it is a very prescriptive kind of analysis of where it should go, how big it should be, and how it relates to the other buildings around it. So this is the part of the form-based code that is detail-oriented. This particular table 5 is a summation of all of the buildable districts. This goes on 2 pages to include all of the 8 districts. But just briefly, on the left-hand side, the form standards, new dwelling units, density, number of dwelling units, total new gross square footage. Seem to be off. Just give it a minute. I can see it on my screen here, but.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, hopefully it comes back on here in a second, but I just give you a further description of the form standards. There are total new gross square footage, then there's some existing business, institutional, and so forth. The building placement, we're going with build 2 lines or setbacks. That's a distance from the property line to the major building, the primary building. Front street frontage build out. A frontage piece is something like a porch, a stoop, an awning, and so forth. A side street frontage build out, same thing. Side street build 2 line, that's the distance on a side street to the building. Interior property lines, that's the distance between the buildings. And then rear setback. And then we have lot and block standards. Any ideas, Pat?
Other than
Starting up?
Xing it out and trying to connect again? Should I do that?
Yeah.
I'm afraid to. Now. There I am. Hopefully this isn't what the public is seeing.
What's that?
Hoping that this isn't what the public, I can't turn off the video because it's not connected.
Shut down your camera.
There's no button even on, it's not even,
Or entertain us.
I can try to dance or something.
Is he rebooting?
Sorry?
Is he trying to reboot the program?
Yeah.
It just kicked us off. I don't know if this is a Zoom problem. He's got internet access, so It's not that. Bill still over there? Did Bill leave? Patrick?
He's probably still there.
Should I go check?
Want me to see if he's there?
Do you want to check if he's over there? Quick. Patrick's got it. Let's leave again. I heard the company Zoom is even starting to require back-to-work protocols. Did you hear that?
Yes. Ultimate of ironies.
Is it possible to ask why we're in a hold mode?
Oh, we're having technical problems.
Is it possible
Very
to ask
good.
a question
What
just
about
about one of the maps and
Sure, it's hard to know. Is anybody in there?
This sort of prevents anything here. This prevents
Patrick?
anything here, so the only
Is
issue
Bill?
Yeah, Bill is in there. This is a Zoom issue. It's not on our end.
was 50 foot
Should I,
every,
is there,
100 foot everywhere? Yeah, 100 foot everywhere.
is there a way to
Just
log in as the host from one of our computers?
we might reduce it to 50 for the.
Try.
I see you've got a buffer there.
Yeah. So this is just, we're in the process now.
Okay.
In motion. Because we have to relax it in some instances and tighten it up.
Time to go back to all in-person meetings.
Yeah,
That's a good
absolutely.
point.
Yeah.
Have you, did you log out and try logging back in?
Patrick, do you have a, should I just try to restart your computer?
Yeah,
This doesn't quite work here,
go to.
I'm not even on them.
or this is precluded, because these are
Is
sand.
that?
Close that out.
Tanks in the edge. So these are
Go to
50.
Microsoft.
Yeah, you can ask a question too.
And on the bar up there.
So,
Zoom.
for the, John Sharp, Woodbury.
I was just
So
thinking-
how much of the seminary's cooperation is needed to get to the November? I mean, is this a planning board, you know, this is your track, you go to the November meeting, and let's say they ghost you completely till November. Does that have an impact on this process? Are you prescribed to get reaction from them, or can this just be a,
That might be the $1 million question.
right? Just curious, I mean.
Well, that's what we're going to be discussing. So it's an excellent point you raised. It's an excellent point.
The thing is, there are two parts to this. One is what the planning board is working on, the other is a development agreement between the town and the seminary.
Seminary.
You really need both of those to get anything done. The seminary can't ghost us on the development plan. They cannot do it, but then there's no plan here.
So theoretically, they are communicating with the select board?
Can I
can't,
address
I can't
this?
speak
That was the
to
point of my conversation earlier, which we were, I would say that the seminary did not give us a plan. They gave us what might be called a trial balloon. And the trial balloon was that they wouldn't really move. They would keep all of the upper campus in its current educational use, that they would not do any development in the central area, and that they would take all of the dormitories and repurpose them, or they wouldn't repurpose them, they would sell them to a developer who would repurpose them into multifamily housing. And that would fit within this plan. In other words, if we had this, I mean, I think that's what we agreed on last time, if we had this ordinance bylaw in effect, and they came in with a plan that said we want to divide the property and take the dormitories and repurpose them into, have them repurposed into multifamily housing. It's not inconsistent with the plan. They could certainly do that with a special permit. The question is whether they would need a special permit or whether they could actually do that by right. But
That, I'll clarify that.
that was their,
I don't know what meeting you were at, but that's not a meeting I was at.
No, what they were proposing is that for the planning board to do an overlay district to specifically address the dormitories. And
Period.
Period. And as you may recall, Harbor Light went before the ZBA to get a change of use and a variance with respect to those very dormitories. And the zoning board of appeals and Dr. Barnes did correct me.
I understand it, but I read their opinion is that they would, plan to stay on the whole middle upper part of the hill for 5 or 10 years, and, hold on a second.
No, I
If
think
this
what
were
they
the bylaw,
what
this
they-
would eliminate what they could do, limit what they could do with that, should they, at a later date, choose to move.
Madam Chair, could we come back to this again after the
Yeah.
Right, I
presentation?
think so, yes.
It's getting
We
way
have
off
different
track.
recollections
Just
on
for
this.
the folks dialed in remotely, we had technical difficulties.
Yes,
So I
thank you.
think we're back.
I think that was obvious.
Thanks very much.
I wonder
Well,
if we
those
could go 10 meetings in a row without technical difficulties.
So I was just quickly going through, and I will not review each of these numbers, but each one, it's called a calibration. When you put fill-in numbers in each of the boxes underneath, say, building placement and front street build-out, when you fill a number in that box, it is the number that has to be used in a development of drawings, for example, on the site plan. And these are called calibrations. This is material that I can describe where this information came from in a lot of detail, but that would take some time. But this is what's up for the board now to discuss and to agree to, or not. And so this is a starting point. And as I say, these are based on standards that were done across the country in different places to fit what we believe to be would be the most fitting for this particular site, this number of buildings and so forth, this type of development. So these would be appropriate to ensure that we get some certainty about what's actually going to be built. there.
Also, these numbers are what is drawn in the illustrative plan. So if you follow these numbers, it will look like the illustrative plan. If you don't follow the numbers, it won't look like the illustrative plan. They match.
Yeah, thanks. So building placement, lot and block standards, building heights, parking locations, very critical, where parking goes. Trying to get parking away from the front of the buildings, for example. And then allowed frontages and encroachments. As I mentioned, the frontages are things like galleries, porches, stoops, and so forth. On residential buildings, that's a common type of frontage. The next page are some notes on Table 5. Now, each one of the districts, and I just took one sample district, and it's the Browns Hill Residential. If the top of Browns Hill were developed with duplex housing, this would be the applicable form standard for that. So each one of the districts will have 2 pages like this that includes a graphic at the top, 2 graphs. One is a site plan on the left, and the other is a section elevation through the building on the right. And this orients you to, by a numbering system or lettering system here, to the various form standards below: building placement, lot and block standards, building forms. This will be identical to the previous one. The previous sheet was a summation of all the areas on 2 sheets of paper. Here, we're going to have the individual buildings on location. So we developed these sketches on the top as part of our work. And then on the next page, this is where parking is going. That site plan on the left is the cross-hatched area is where the parking would be allowed. So there's a distance M from, say, the front property line to the frontage of the building right here. Then a side yard with a side street, and then between buildings here and so forth. And then the other sketch is for allowed encroachments, build 2 lines and so forth. So if you have a bay window, we stipulate how far out it can go and so forth, or a porch or something of that nature. Again, sounds like really a lot of detail. It isn't, but it sort of guarantees that you're going to have a specific relationship between the buildings and the street and the sidewalk. And that's what's really critical when you go with compact development. This is not like a house sitting 50 feet back from the street, 40 feet off the side yards, floating there in the center. When you start compacting all the buildings, you need to establish an order there, a certain distance back to create what's called a street wall. So you have a good relationship between the buildings, their heights, and the street width, and so forth. So that's where these charts become really helpful. This is a new drawing. This took the district map, and one of the, as I've been mentioning before, streets are a very important component to the form-based type code. And here we identified three different types of street types, and where they're located. So the red ones would be roads. Roads are without parking. The green are streets. We were considering parking one side only. And then the blue is rear alley. We're trying to access a lot of these residential buildings by a rear alley for parking behind the buildings, not in front of the buildings. This particular drawing then is a graphic 6.1 streets and sidewalks. These are the three streets that we created. So the ST 5026, the ST is a street, the 50 is the right-of-way, 50 feet. The 26 is the paving distance across the road. In the first case, it's with 8-foot parking strip right here along the side of the road. The road is without parking. It's there's all two-way traffic. Two-way traffic, I'll go back to the street. There is a planting strip for street trees and then a sidewalk on the interior. So you have the travel lanes, 18 feet, you have the 8-foot parking lane, you have a 7-foot planting strip or street tree strip, and a 5-foot sidewalk, and now you're at a property line. And the other side is typical there. The rear alley is this one on the right, and again, it has its 2 lanes. So these are the stipulations. Where does it happen? Planned districts, they're all listed here. Right-of-way width, 50 feet, 50, and 24 feet. Pavement width, 26, 24, 24. Design speeds and so forth. Traffic lanes, 2 lanes. So the streets are stipulated here, and they're referenced on the previous plan, this one. That's where the locations are. This was a table Marty was referring to earlier, 6.2, which is required vehicle parking space amounts. And this came from Smart Parking Model Bylaw, former Smart Growth Energy Toolkit, Commonwealth of Mass. So this comes from state information, their recommendations for numbers of parking spaces for type of use. So the use here and a number of parking spaces. So that, again, would be the guide. And finally, Table 7, which is Table of Dimensional Standards. If, as a developer, you decide that the illustrative plans, and I'll show those to you in just a second, to finalize this, the Table of Dimensional Standards would be the guideline you would have to use for a concept plan that's not like the illustrative plans, untethered from it. So this is where they are. This is more like your conventional zoning, minimum parcel size, minimum frontage, front setback, rear setback. These are all familiar to everybody. Open space, this is percentage. The reason this is not so great is that this tells you how much, 15%. It doesn't tell you where it is. And the most important thing about open space, and I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this and would recognize it, although it may not be obvious, it's where that open space occurs, how useful it is, and the size of it in relation to the buildings and the number of people who will use it. What typically happens when you give a developer, not to disparage developers, but 15%, that's a number they have to come to somehow. It could be residual space, it could be along the perimeter, it could be non-contiguous space somewhere on the site. They need to come up with that number. It means less to them where it is. And that's the critical thing about the form-based. Everything there is stipulated, where it happens, how big, and essentially what the scale of it is. So those are the things that are really important, especially in a neighborhood like where the seminary is located. That is a very critical thing, the scale of all these buildings, their sizes and relationships. And this is going to be a building that will, in one sense, be very familiar with you, but in another, it's going to feel like a different place. That, I'm sure others have thoughts on that, but, and this piece, because there was a question from, I don't know if the gentleman's here, who had a question about build-out, but this is not part of the plan, but we did just a final analysis. Okay, we have 4 illustrative plans. What is the build-out on these for all 4? For example, illustrative plan number 1. We have the new construction. Along the top, we have the south, stables, central, north. These are the districts that are being planned out. So this is not the top of the hill on Browns Hill. This is not the dormitories. This is everything else, other than those 2 major areas. So this is the new construction for dwelling units, for square footage and so forth, with accounting here for dwelling units per acre, square footage per acre, and so forth. The yellow column on the right is the grand total. So for illustrative plans, there are 68 new dwelling units, 146,000 square feet, new construction. Again, does not include dormitories. Illustrative plan B, or 2, is 122 dwelling units, 144,000 square feet. This one happens to introduce a commercial senior serviced housing complex of roughly 50,000 square feet. If you look in the central area right here in the middle, that 80 is 80 beds, that 50 is 50,000 square feet, 25,000 on each level, 2 levels. That gives you a total build-out. So you have some dwelling units around there that are of the right scale, and then this senior serviced housing. So it's not all residential population. This is an option for a builder to put a commercial building in there, like a senior serviced housing, which would be one of the uses that is permitted. Illustrative Plan B, the build-out is again 68, 146. So it came out remarkably close in all 4 of these concept plans. And then lastly, I just jumped to the illustrative plans if you're not familiar with them.
Is that what we're allowing?
What's that?
Take a look.
Now, talk about steep
That's low
slopes.
density.
Talk about steep slopes. That's right.
Surprisingly, 2 people on the planning board have been there.
Yeah. This will focus in the center in a second. There we go. This is plan number 1. And again, on the top of the hill here is the Browns Hill. This is all duplex housing. Now, you notice on this that what we did was put a numeral, in this case, a number 2, in each of the buildings. What that number means is the number of dwelling units in that particular building. So each one of these buildings is a duplex. 2 houses share a common wall, for example, and they share a driveway, and there are parking garages in the building and so forth. So this concept, we're also, in this case, each one of these units averages out to about 2,600 square feet on 2 levels. So this could be senior housing, this could be any number of things, but this is one option for plan number 1. The bottom of the hill is all residential, down here. Again, this is Woodbury down here on the bottom. We have the North Green, existing dormitories, E and F. Largest buildings around it. Here, this is a new building, 8, which is a multiplex and so forth, and new buildings here and a new building here. We have a central green, a small building that sort of organizes this little cluster of housing around it here. So we have 8 units there, 4, 4, 4, and so forth, and then 2 right here on the corner. And then this area, the South Green area, is where we have our townhouses. Take a second to focus. It's a huge file. So these are all townhouses, and what they open onto a central green here. We call it South Green. So there is no parking in front of it. The parking is in rear alleys here, parking garages in the back. There will be an access way from the alley to the unit in the back, but access the front yard, so to speak, for all of these townhouses is on the green. It's a very interesting, very nice way to do a build. All axially located off Pilgrim Hall right there. This would be either housing for 6, or it could be a communal building. One of those two options there. Dormitories, C and D. And just moving along here to, so this is, plan number 2 is the senior service housing here. That yellowish building right there in the center is a building similar to the Riverbend project in Ipswich. Same size. The idea would be similar, again, 80 beds, 50,000 square feet. The rest would be residential here, residential around the dormitory, but a commercial building there. And again, this Plan B or Plan 2 is residential on the top. Plan number 3 is a commercial top. It takes the existing buildings that are shown in blue here, and we anticipated where if you were to build those out to change the configuration or make it a little more efficient, where would you do it? This is where it would happen, in these yellow parts, in our opinion. But there are also 4 tanks that are buried up here, right here on the top of the hill. Those are town property. They will remain there apparently, so they are off limits to any construction. So they're really, the limitations on the top of the hill are surface parking areas. You could do a structured parking unit, but be pretty costly to do it up there. But anyway, so this has the commercial on the top and a residential on the bottom. And then the last plan here, Plan 4, has the commercial on the top of the site and commercial residential on the bottom. So those are the 4 options we saw in a combination of 4. 2 options on the top, 2 on the bottom, and there are 4 types of combinations. So those are the 4 configurations that we analyzed in that chart that had 1 through 4 for build-out. So I think that was it. I don't know, Jonathan, you want to add something?
I just wanted to point out that those plans, even though now they're labeled 1 through 4, it's all the same information people have been looking at for weeks and weeks. It's just combined into the order that makes sense to tie in with the code. Well, there's no new configuration in those maps.
Yeah, these are all referenced in a sequence in the code that Marty went over earlier. So that would be the, they get all inserted in there in the appropriate place.
Please, but just briefly, I know you've been eager to ask a question, but I would prefer hearing from planning board members before we open it to the.
High-level clarifying.
Okay.
It's not really in the details. Going just to the perimeter buffers.
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Valerie Peck. I'm at 37 Miles River Road, and I'm one of the abutters. And I just wanted clarification on these perimeter buffers as it relates to, I see on your Browns Hill district map, they're specified in only certain areas on the map, for example, on Woodbury Street, and then there's a 100-foot buffer on Bridge Street. There's no specification for a 100-foot buffer on the property line that runs along Miles River. So I'm just trying to understand why that doesn't exist, and if it has something to do with whether an illustrative plan is being used or just a concept plan that's not tethered to an illustrative plan. Does that make sense today?
Yeah. Right now, there is no buffer there. It is open space beyond it. Buffering, there would be no change to whatever is there, would be, again, the first comment make on the Gordon Conwell property in relation. I assume you're the house closest to the.
Yes, and I'm referring,
To
yes,
the,
I mean, I understand the heritage landscape piece, that
Yeah,
is a huge piece of it,
Yes.
but my property goes all the way up to where the utility expansion area is, and I just didn't know if there is a 100-foot buffer that runs down, and also there are other neighbors along that you can't see their house on this. So, for example, the Browns Hill, top of the hill development on the Miles River Street side of that particular zone, that there's a neighbor down there. Is there not a 100-foot buffer there?
It's not anticipated on this plan, and again, this is, the
So if I just can clarify,
entire
the
property.
It says that buffers go around the entire property perimeter in 9.6.5.2.
what I'd just like to point out was one of the reasons that those buffers were pointed out in the district map is because the challenge we have in creating so many different options for the developer, specifically at the top of the hill, we have a residential option, we have a commercial option. The residential option, Emil, if you go back to the district, not the district maps, but the, go to 1 or 2. And then zoom in on one of those at the top of the hill. What we were in process and not complete on is the residential layout on the top of the hill here doesn't work with a 100-foot buffer on the Bridge Street side. So what we were trying to do is start to delineate where there might be exceptions to the 100-foot buffer all the way around the property. So, for example, this map shows a 50-foot buffer
Right here.
between the Bridge Street side and the buildings, and then there's already a 50-foot buffer on the subdivided lots, so that makes a 100-foot total, residential to residential separation. Then we go to residential to commercial on plans 3 and 4, and we up that buffer from 50 to 100. So we were working on those issues, but we're not quite done with all of those refinements. So we're thinking about buffers all the way around the property. It's just that with all the flexibility we're trying to offer, there's not quite a one-size-fits-all for the buffers, if that makes sense. So it's in process.
So what you're noting on some of these plans is where you might have to
We might have to have an exception. Yes.
But where is feasible that 100-foot is around the entire, and that's regardless of whether they're using an illustrative plan
Right.
or a concept plan.
Right.
That's not tethered to
Right.
an illustrative.
Exactly. But
Okay.
everything's in process. Again, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
okay.
I's to dot, I's to, dot and T's to cross here. And,
Okay.
and so you're going to find little things that aren't clear
Yeah.
or aren't complete.
Okay.
But
I appreciate the
all of the
clarification.
thinking is in there. We're just trying to get the navigation and the clarity of information, put
I
together.
understand there's a lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts, thousands and thousands. So,
So the current text will have to be changed.
We just changed it.
yes, yes. And again, this is
Wherever
all,
possible.
this is like playing leapfrog. I do something, it affects somebody else. Emil does something, it affects somebody else.
Jonathan,
So-
I get it, I
so
get it.
that's all.
I even looking at some of the documents that Emil produced, I saw were different than what I have here, so it changed between the time I got it and the presentation tonight. So that's why I'm saying we need to go through this document as we have it, so that we're all talking the same language and we're on the same page, at least in terms of concepts and design and how this is proceeding.
Agreed.
Because your explanation is a good one, it just conflicts with the text that
Absolutely.
just got corrected.
Absolutely, yep.
Should we keep with we've been talking for over an hour. Should we keep with the public and then come
Yeah,
back to us?
good idea.
Yeah, let's hear from the public, and then the planning board can have its discussion. So if anybody here in the audience wants to ask questions, make comments, please come to the podium and identify yourself.
Thank you. Bob Cavilla, 233 Woodbury Street, right across from the proposed new road. So I had a clarifying question. It doesn't look like that's as of right. Is that correct? It's,
Which, can you go to the road so that we have a illustration of what?
This road in the center, up to the central green.
so right, so you have the existing one by the pond.
This
and
one,
Right in between.
this is
that-
the proposed,
Yeah.
yes.
So what is the plan with that? And like, would that be automatically approved? I mean, that's a horrible spot. And,
I'd be happy to address that.
okay.
And are you finished with the question, or I didn't mean to
Oh, and then the
interrupt.
last part of that was just, proposing a new road, whether it's across from my house or somewhere else, it just feels very disruptive. So I'm just curious what the
Sure.
thought
Okay.
process is.
So what would be required in any one of these plans, whether it's an illustrative plan or a plan not attached to the illustrative plan, would be a traffic study. and a safety study. And so it would be a combination of emergency access, safety around the site, and safety outside of the site. So it'd be a fairly comprehensive look at all of the components around getting on and off the site and moving through the site. And what we would want to do is anticipate if a traffic study says you can't just have two main ways in and out and then a one-way on a sharp bend, you need another way in there, to make sure that we've thought it through so that if it's required, it's in a thoughtful place. So
So
it's
that's
not
not at that
required. It's
stage.
not required. It's dependent on the entire process of the design, the traffic studies, and the fire department, weighing in on what's safe and reasonable access to this site.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly options which any traffic study would explore, such as adding a second lane to the existing entrance
Yep.
on Woodbury, or adding a second lane on the exit down to Bridge Street.
Yeah.
There's land there sufficient. Whether it's safe is another question,
Yeah.
but there's options.
Yeah, I just wanted, where it keeps showing up in the plan, I want to make sure it wasn't pre-approved.
No.
Okay, thank
No,
you.
it would be
But the good-
absolutely predicated on that study. Expertise beyond this room.
But it isn't the first time we've heard the concern, and I guess the benefit of putting it there versus leaving it off the rest.
I'll address that as well,
I-
because we have heard that quite a bit. So, what you want to do is you want to make sure that it's put in a place that makes sense internally and externally, the maximum possible benefits, the least number of detriments.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is, if that additional access is required, this is our best understanding of sight lines, steep slopes, and access to the site for safety, but it is not predicated. It would have to be analyzed.
Right.
So what would be, I think, a mistake is to ignore it and then have the traffic engineer or the fire department say, you have to have an additional access point, and in the illustrative plan, if it's required, it's got a curve, it's got heavy vegetation, so that the traffic is slowed down, the headlights are managed, and it's in a place where there's better sight lines and not on a steep slope.
I guess it's all good points you made. We have those opportunities if and when it's required at a future if point. It would be a good compromise. I think we haven't made much of compromise yet in the plans, and I know they're still being developed. It would be a low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, to remove from the plans and leave for a future date if required.
We could do that, and what I would offer is that something much worse could come out of the process without this advanced planning and thinking.
Agreed.
That's all.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of thought put into how that's executed in terms of speed, position, headlights, position on the property, safety, access. So we could take it out.
Yeah.
I think it would be at the risk of the abutters. That's my personal opinion. But the board could,
Just say it's crosshatched, or, because right now it looks like it's part of every.
it could be something that's only for fire emergency, and it has a gate across it.
On the map itself, it looks like you're saying, it looks like it's a given. Why not just designate it with a different color or
What we could do is we could say if needed, and the default could be it's gated and it's for fire access only. So
I'd give you one other option. Jake Fumara, 139 Essex Street. I'm going to jump around a little bit because there's been a lot said, and I've watched the last 3 meetings on Zoom. But another option would be to look, you have maximums for square footage. You know the usages. There's no reason a traffic study can't be done now and couldn't have been done. You've shown very detailed charts about square footages, usages, no different than when a developer comes forward it feels to me like a property that was only developed under the Dover Amendment for a very specific purpose, which is now being changed over to a totally different use. And I'm supportive of a lot of the residential uses. I am not supportive of the commercial at all. That a traffic study and a study regarding the sewer, when you have maximum square footages that you're putting in, could all be done now. I understand that our rush was, we gotta help the seminary. They wanna go faster. Patrick saw my email to Ken Barnes a week ago. They are advertising a 209-unit residential existing property for sale and a commercial property for sale. I asked them for the marketing materials. I told them I couldn't sign a confidentiality agreement because I'm gonna share it with my neighbors. Nothing. No word from the seminary. So we're running really fast, it feels like, to help the seminary. And let's be honest, let's just say that it's 50 single-family house lots that they get here. And I think that's a stretch looking at what they got out of Bridge Street, but just say it is. 500,000 apiece is 25 million bucks. I don't disagree with Bill that the value of the existing 209 units, assuming this overlay goes forward, is $30 to $40 million. We are creating an incredible amount of value for the seminary. They are not showing up. They are not being helpful. And I'll tell you one reason they might not be showing up. Tonight's the first time that I heard that this board voted to get rid of single-family housing use as an allowed right. And I think if I'm them, I'm thinking to myself, that's been my relief valve to keep my business alive. We're
No,
taking that away.
Actually, it's not. The student housing is the big nut. It's valued somewhere between $25 and $30 million.
Not without this overlay, Rick. Think of it. It's not allowed by right.
Oh, no, they could go Chapter 40B. No, don't laugh.
I'm not laughing. I'm
You're
just saying
not
that's
going to get $30 million for Chapter 40B.
That's a very,
Nowhere near it.
that's not a realistic, I'm just trying to be realistic about what I see on the site, and I'm trying to give you my thoughts, but
Right.
it's their value, their survival technique the past decade has been selling single-family lots.
So follow this logic. They came to the board 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago and said.
Oh, I saw.
Right.
I
you
saw.
said- basically slapped us in the face and said, screw this. We want you to go to town meeting with an overlay district for the student housing. That's where they want their money from.
Agreed. Totally agree.
So that's their focus. So that's
But
where.
they can do that.
Just let me finish.
No interruptions,
So
please.
that tells me that's where they see their most value, that they can quickly jettison that piece of property to try and survive. So that's my biggest fear with them, which gets to the question of, do we continue with this process or not? But anyway, keep going.
So and I agree, I watched the meeting, I listened to Dr. Barnes, we're back to where we were when Harbor Light was in here, and I was attending all those meetings. We're in the same exact spot we were 8 months ago, and you guys have done a ton of work, so I get the frustration. But to me, this is all about traffic and
Can I
to some
interject and
extent-
just to answer that for just a second, and then I'll let you keep speaking, but you led with that, so I'll
Yeah,
lead
please.
with that answer.
Please.
What you have to remember is that this is volunteer work. So I won't even say how many $100,000 worth of professional volunteer work that has come from this board. Volunteer, okay? I 100%, and this whole board 100% supports the impulse of having a sewer study and a traffic study. How about even an instrument survey to draw accurate drawings on? How about that? Okay? Who's funding it?
So
Who's funding it?
here's the promise. Here's the
Pause
promise
for just
that
a
I'll
second.
make.
So I 100% agree. We're doing the best we can with volunteer work. That's all I'll say.
And this is amazing work, but here's the promise that I'll make. I'm going to draft an email to the select board saying that this board is not tasked correctly. They don't have the tools to put forward a plan for 100 acres, an overlay over 100 acres, and on a site that was never, ever intended to have this level of density in the first place. This is the most impactful thing that potentially could ever happen in Hamilton, without a doubt. It's 100 acres in Hamilton.
Yeah.
And when you take those illustrative plans, put them on a Google map, and zoom out, guess what? 9.6.7.5, the idea of a special permit. The proposed development is compatible with adjacent land uses. We're throwing that out the window. I understand it, because it's not compatible with anything in the neighborhood, really anything in Hamilton. But I still think there should be some senior housing. There should be some affordable housing. But the idea of drawing a road in front of the Cavilla's house to support the illustrative plan that we're drawing, I'd rather study the parking and then figure out how much you're allowed to draw from an illustrative plan. And I agree with you, you're not given the funding, but at some point, the board's got to throw their hand up and say, we don't have the tools we need to do this. And truthfully, the seminary is not being cooperative. And the meeting the other day, no matter what you say, Bill, Professor Wheaton, like in the end, that was a lot of steps backwards as opposed to forwards, is the way that I looked at it. But I get what they wanted to do. If I'm them, that's how I would have played it too. Go through the whole 8 months, come back, because all they really do want is to sell those 209 units. They can operate for another 10, 15 years, and we'll see if people want to be priests in 10 or 15 years, and if more people are attending and more people are paying to attend. But in the end, it's a failed business, and I think they're doing their best to figure out a way out of it. I just don't want it to be at the expense of the town. And I think a traffic study and a sewer study are sort of where we're at, and what you all need to sort of move forward.
Well, actually, we do need that, but that's not something that's part of a bylaw. That's part of the development agreement. And John Witten, and he's here tonight, and he can address this, but at the outset of this process, he indicated to the board, and I have material from the town of Winchester, which substantiates this, the bylaw and the development agreement go hand in hand. And the development agreement is a contractual instrument, and it would address the very things you're talking about. And so, to the extent that this site is amenable to development, either along the lines of an illustrative plan or another concept plan, the property value could be maximized if a developer could come in and know what the heck was going on with the wastewater treatment center, which apparently complies with state law, but still smells. That's a huge problem in my mind, and I'm sure the abutters would agree with me. The seminary could do a traffic study, assuming various scenarios with respect to the build-out, but that would involve the expenditure of funds. And so I can truthfully say at this juncture, there is no development agreement in any type of draft form. The only thing we have seen is topics for discussion, which did include the elimination of marijuana dispensaries on the site, which I found to be not germane to what we're really talking about here. And so we do not have a development agreement, and that's a substantial omission in the whole process.
So it's August 15th, and you're telling me they have to go hand in hand, and no one's working on the development agreement.
From my
Shouldn't this be
understanding.
put on hold?
Next topic of discussion.
Next topic of
I think
discussion.
that gets to the conundrum that we're facing is that the seminary has decided to go dark on us, which tells me they still don't know what they're doing. You're right, Cushman Wakefield is representing the 209 units for sale. So I think that's where their eggs are in the basket. You know, they're putting their eggs there as like, somebody comes in, wants to buy it, well, we're gonna sell it. But how are they gonna sell it? I don't know, because, you know.
That's the point.
it
They
comes out-
can't
right,
sell it.
comes out of
You know what?
Dover.
You've shut me off 5 times tonight,
Okay,
okay?
Let Bill speak. He gets-
5 times. I've
So
kept
you
track
get
of
to
them,
respond.
okay?
okay.
Okay, they can't sell any of that without an underlying zoning, okay? We're not going to, if we were to pass a bylaw like this, now just think about it. They could go ahead within that bylaw and say, all right, we'll do a first stage of the plan, which is that we'll convert the apartments, the dormitories into apartments. And then we'll just continue to run our educational system at the top of the hill. And then when we want to sell it, what are we going to be able to do with it? if the plan is in effect, it limits what they can do with it 5 or 10 years from now to the betterment of the town. If we were to, I'm not in favor of just having some special little district for those apartments, but what I'm saying is we can meet all of their goals and the town goals if we pass this. All right, they can do what they want next year in terms of selling off the dormitories and repurposing them into apartments. And if they want 10 years from now to get out of the top of the hill, well, they're going to have to deal with the bylaw, which will have a set of options and very, specific plans for them. That looks like a pretty good plan from my point of view. You think of it as 2 phases.
I
Give
understand
them
that.
money now and still control
I understand that. My
what
only
they
issue
do with it later on.
only issue with the first phase is obviously the same issue that I had with when Andrew DeFranza was here with the original board, which was what are we putting on for stipulations for that first phase? Is it going to be, because it doesn't meet, there was a discussion, I think, on the 8-1 meeting that if it's all affordable housing, it's not going to raise much revenue. I understood your point about density and things like that, but in the end, affordable housing doesn't touch the revenue aspect of what the town is looking for.
Right, and let me just say this. A bylaw is not the document to determine if there is affordable housing in those dormitories reused as apartment. What percentage would be affordable, if any?
Right, but this board's
That's
making.
the underlying development agreement.
That's the development agreement.
Right, but this board's making decisions based on the revenues that Gamble put forth, which had a cap of 25% affordable on those 209 units. That's how they derived their revenue assumptions. And now this board is saying, well, we don't think single-family housing is worth as much as what they want to do. But they have caps in it. So, but I get it, you're not working on the development agreement, so again, we're back to the same spot, which is, if they're not going to talk to us, what are we doing?
Well, it's a very good question. It sort of gets to the heart of the matter is, and, I've been operating as, they don't know what they're doing. They're operating from desperation. They are living day to day. They've got a financial cliff. We don't know when they're falling off of it. But we know it's coming close, and Scott Sundquist said next year is they may have to start layoffs. So we know the cliff is close. So it's like, well, we can't really stop because the landowner doesn't know what it's doing. It's going around and chasing its tail. And we're going, well, we could sit around and wait until they figure out what they're going to do and hope that it all works out, or we can say, we're taking control of this piece of property. That leaves them one option. They could say, well, screw you, I don't want any of this to do with this. I got to get out fast, I'm selling it to Harbor Light for, a much less sum. Maybe rather than 25 or 30, maybe it's 8 or 9.
Yep.
Something like that. But they're going, that's better than we got now, and then we're gone. Or they're thinking, and my guess is this is where they're thinking they're going, is they want to see if they can team up with another educational institution. They said early on, they've said a lot of things, so I put a ton of salt with it, that they had been approached by other educational institutions. My guess is that's where they think they're going, that they're trying to make that happen. That would preserve their educational mission, which is all well and good. But we don't know any of those things, and absent any information that they're giving and clarity, which we haven't gotten for 15 months, I think our only option is to continue to do this and say, well, we're handing you, as you made this point, and it gets to another question, we're handing you the potential of $40 million return on investment. So what's the problem?
Right.
Could I ask John Whitten to speak to this point at this juncture? John, are you with us?
I am. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes,
yeah, I
please,
can.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. So, there's a lot that's been discussed tonight that I'd like to respond to, and I can do it quickly. So please tell me, you want me to move on to the next topic. I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is the development agreement linkage to the zoning bylaw. To me, there's no way possible to develop an overlay district of this magnitude if it is not tethered to a development agreement. And the reason the board has talked about this for many months, but it's just worth repeating, the main reason is because the zoning bylaw cannot simply anticipate the myriad of possibilities of a development that would be allowed on these 102 acres under the new bylaw. There's too many things that fall between the gap that either we can't anticipate, the board can't anticipate, but more likely that the board can't regulate. Town meeting wouldn't have the authority to impose the kind of restrictions and negotiations through zoning that we would do in a normal course through a contract. And that's all a development agreement is. It's a contract between the municipality and the developer. So when we have a complicated development like this, pre-existing structures, a built-out neighborhood or directly abutting neighborhood, and all the complications of the infrastructure of this site, it could not, in my experience, could not work satisfactorily to simply rely on zoning alone. The two go hand in hand. In a perfect system, the development agreement anticipates zoning and zoning anticipates the development agreement. It's made even more complicated here because we don't have a development. Most development agreements are crafted based on a proposed development. So whether it's residential or commercial or industrial, the development agreement responds to that by saying, well, we've got a wastewater treatment issue or we have a stormwater management issue. Let's deal with that contractually. So the planning board or the Board of Appeals during a special permit process doesn't have to stumble through all that. We can deal with it through a contract. But here we don't have a development, so how do we develop a development agreement? Because we don't have details. That's solvable because we can anticipate a lot of the issues, but it's just not perfect. So first off, the planning board's incredible effort to develop this overlay district can only go so far, because I think the board is hearing kind of the pushback tonight, and I've observed it from the abutters in the past. We don't know what the development is. And we're crafting a zoning bylaw hopeful for certain outcomes, but they're not guaranteed. The only way to assure more or less that outcome is through a development agreement. So the other point I want to make, and again, I'll jump around, so please interrupt me, Madam Chair, if you want me to stay on one point. The question is, what do you do from here? I've observed this for now 7 or 8 months. I don't think this is ready for prime time to go to town meeting because of all the things we've been talking about. What's the development? What happens if we move forward without a development agreement? I cannot imagine town meeting feeling confident that the outcome of this bylaw will be protective of the town of Hamilton. And that's not the planning board's fault. I think that's because the seminary, as members of the board have said tonight and in the past, they really haven't engaged. And they may have a strategic reason for not engaging, and that's certainly not within my ability to discern. But I don't recommend the board going too much further, and certainly not to town meeting, if you have a landowner that hasn't participated or at least articulated their comfort level or discomfort level with the bylaw. Because there's nothing worse in Massachusetts zoning laws, we all know, than trying to rezone a landowner's property without their assent or without at least their comfort level. And that seems to be what's happening here. So I think the seminary's put the board and the town in a really horrible position, whether by design or simply innocence, because we now have all of this work, professional work from your consultants, hard work from the planning board, which includes professional work as well, but we don't have a landowner buy-in. So I go back to the chair's comment earlier, which is should the board put this on pause? I'm nervous about putting it on pause for too long because the development agreement discussions can happen quickly. And my understanding is there will be a conversation reasonably soon between the select board and members of the seminary. But it's getting dangerously close to what we had talked about as a November town meeting date, where we don't have either buy-in or opposition from the seminary, and even worse, we don't have a project. So let me stop there, Madam Chair, because I'll just keep rambling. I'd rather respond to the board's questions more specifically if I could.
My fundamental question is without an overlay district, or without some type of district, the seminary cannot sell the dormitories and have them reused as market rate housing with an affordability component. That they couldn't get the relief they wanted from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So now the planning board was asked, we didn't respond to this, to do a separate overlay district just for the dormitories. But that's not a permitted use under R1B zoning. So even if they sold it, the underlying zoning would not change. And so I don't see
Yeah,
how it could.
no, that's absolutely right. And I don't, it's not my role to provide the seminary with planning or legal advice, but I feel comfortable saying this. There could be an application as pre-existing non-conforming structures to the ZBA to seek to expand, alter, or change those dormitory units. That is possible. But again, here we are trying to hypothesize what the seminary is thinking.
Well,
So
excuse me, let me just interrupt you for a minute, though.
Yes, yes.
What happened at the ZBA is, in addition to the change of use, Harbor Light sought a variance, and although the ZBA didn't issue a formal decision, it basically took a straw poll, and it said no variance.
Yeah, I mean, those of the veterans on the planning board know, getting a variance in Massachusetts is supposed to be near impossible. The court has been consistent about that for decades. So, the application would be, in my opinion, under 48 Section 6 to expand, alter, or change pre-existing non-conforming structures. But again, I'm not going to give the seminary legal advice. So I think they have options for the dorms, but of course, that leaves in jeopardy the remaining 2/3 of the site because the wastewater treatment plant tethers the entire campus together. So this goes back now full circle. Why not look at this whole parcel holistically when it is all related? So yeah, maybe you could sever the lower campus, which is, I think, what the seminary was getting at a few weeks ago, but that comes at great risk. It comes at great risk because now you're leaving 2/3 of the parcel tethered to a residential component with a similar wastewater treatment capacity. I mean, it's from a planning perspective, it's a terrible idea, in my humble opinion.
Should we complete the public?
So it sounds like, I'm just thinking out loud here, given what you've said, John, that really the Board of Selectmen and you and whoever else is on that negotiating committee need to get in touch with the seminary and determine if they can and will re-engage on completing a development agreement that goes in tandem with the overlay district as it is today, before going much farther.
Yeah, Rick, I totally agree. And if you don't mind, let me just add one piece to it. If I'm a voter in Hamilton and I'm reading the warrant and listening to the debate on this article, the first question I would ask, I think, is how can I be assured that all the gap fillers have been filled? And meaning, what will happen if there's an adjudication by the planning board through the special permit process? I choose not to do the concept plan. I want to develop my own plan. Now I need a special permit. There's no assurance to me in the town that will be tackled by the special permit granting authority sitting at the time. The only assurance I would have, the only protection I would have is the development agreement. I mean, the zoning bylaw is helpful, and trusting my board members is helpful, but the development agreement is contractual, and that's what I want. And I think that's what the select board wants, and I know that's what the planning board wants. And frankly, I think that's what the landowner wants too, because it's a contract. It cuts both ways. The contractual benefits run to the seminary just as much as they run to the town. Moving forward solely with the zoning bylaw for a project of this complexity, I don't think can work. It has to be in tandem with some sort of contractual agreement.
No, I agree, and I think you make a very good point, that we can't go to town meeting unless we have that, because, the folks in the room and the other abutters are going, well, all well and good of what you've developed in this, but we have no contractual agreement with the landowner for things that the bylaw can't control. And as a matter of fact, if I were a dispassionate voter, I'd say the same thing. And I'd say, nope, not now, not until you have that instrument. So it sounds like the only avenue we have is to re-engage with the seminary and say, look, we've got to, we've gone a long way to enhancing the value of your property, probably 4 or 5 times over what you can get with single-family housing. Do you want to play ball or not? And if they say no, then we're done.
So, John, would you suggest that rather than refining the maps, that what we should do is try and take all the concepts that are embedded in the maps and write a development agreement that kind of, guides or limits what any potential buyer can do to, fit in with the concept of the maps? That words at this point are more important than maps.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think that would be the position you may find yourself in. It's really untenable, though, Dr. Wheaton, because there's too many. It's a parade of horribles. There's too many things we cannot anticipate because we don't have a development. But I think that might be where this ends up. If the board moves forward to town meeting, it may be the only way to accomplish that is because we do figure out how to bake into a development agreement those anticipated problems. Whether the seminary would execute that or not, though, it remains to be seen. And, I wrote a note, I don't know, it was a month and a half ago, and, I certainly was not intending to be disrespectful to the seminary, but my comment was they have to step up. They have to comment. The board needs to know what about this draft does not work for them. Otherwise, the board's going to move full steam ahead. And, that's not good for the board and that's not good for the town. So I feel the same way about the development agreement. We could craft one, but it's anticipating too many unknowns. It's not impossible, but it's really, really difficult. We need a project to craft a development agreement around, or at least a semblance of a project. Where it stands now, we just have nothing. We just have good plans from the planning board without the landowner's assent.
Oh, I think it's time to retire to the Black Cow or something for a double martini.
Maybe, continue public hearings.
You might have company.
The Black Cow.
I know, the Post now.
Yeah, right, the Post, right. Jack Davis, 57 Lois Street. I'm not an abutter, but interested townsperson. I'd like to just make a comment and raise a question of sort of a philosophic and categorical issue concerning types of housing. I think in a lot of the discussion up to this point, of course, affordable housing has been discussed, and of course, single-family housing on 1-acre lots appears to be off the table. 55 and over housing has been discussed, possibility of aided residential and so forth. My question is, should there be another category, and for lack of a better word, call it also entry-level housing? That is an entry-level price point. And what I mean is that in terms of the demographic and economic diversity of the town, I think it would be desirable if, say, a young family who would like to move into Hamilton
or if a new teacher or firefighter who would desire to actually live in the town where they work were able to find entry-level housing. It's not affordable housing. It's not a McMansion, okay? And if we're told that, I guess the most recent median selling price of a single-family house in Massachusetts is $610,000. $610,000. That's the state median for single-family housing in terms of recent sales.
Well, in the metro area,
That's higher. Well, obviously, Boston, Newburyport, it'd be in the 900 million, so forth. But in terms of where we are here, two questions. And by the way, I support the general direction that this planning board is taking, and I appreciate the tremendous labor, thought, and expertise that you have donated to this town in this very complex, labor-intensive job. So thank you very much, and I think you're headed in the right direction. Now, my question is, in terms of the development plan, but also the illustrative plans that you proposed here, I understand that would allow for what I'm calling entry-level type housing, either as a duplex, triplex, or that's one thing. And the other question is, hypothetically, would it be possible from the side of the planning board to sort of bake into any development plan, which hopefully will be negotiated with the seminary? Okay, but would it be possible from the side of the planning board to bake into that development plan somehow to incentivize a developer to consider, okay, quote, entry-level housing in that range? That's my question. Does that make sense? And of course, that's an economic as well as a planning question. I'm not a developer. I don't know what works, but I certainly would like to see a greater range of housing stock in the town, including possible housing for newcomers. And let me just say that personally living downtown, my wife and I have lived downtown for 47 years, and we've seen a lot of demographic change, children growing up, moving out here. And lately, we have seen younger couples moving in, some without children, some with children, so forth. And we find that demographic and economic mix is a healthy, I think, ethos for our neighborhood and perhaps for the town. So that's my question and comment. But what about so-called entry-level housing as a category of discussion?
Well, I think, Mr. Davis, that would probably have to be, as you said, baked into a development agreement. But one of the purposes that we have set forth in this bylaw is to, and I'll read it, it says, utilize established principles such as clustered housing and provide a mix of housing types, cottages, townhouse, multifamily, and ownership choices, apartments, condominiums, for different needs, desires, and incomes. So we could even adjust that language to expand it a little bit to include entry-level housing. I mean, we don't want to get too specific because then it almost defeats the purpose. We want to keep it at a higher level. But part of this, of the illustrative plans, they're not large units, not dwelling units. And so the idea was to meet the needs of different income levels, because right now in Hamilton, one would need a pretty darn sizable income to buy most of the houses that are available for sale. And you'd need more than a sizable income to get the $4 million ones, or at least maintain them after you own them.
so we're at a juncture here as to.
Before we start our conversation, could I just ask if any other members of the public wish to say anything? And if not, the planning board's going to start its conversation.
I could keep going all night, but
Well, I think those comments would be helpful if we decide to keep going.
Let me just check the audience quick. Remote audience, that is.
Can you read those? Because I can't see them.
I can't.
Shall I? All right, I believe this is the first comment. Thank you all. This is Deborah Hoyle from the seminary. Ken was unfortunately unable to attend tonight because of the time difference while he's overseas. He will follow up ASAP to clarify any questions about the proposal that was sent and also update the planning board on the process of collecting bids. It's a comment then from Deborah. Quick comment from Scott Sundquist. We are paying attention and we do appreciate the work of the planning board. Thank you for your time. Follow-up is, again, same thing. Ken Barnes is back into the country in 2 weeks and he would be happy to meet and talk about these issues. First or second week of September would be good, and since the time bids will be in from Cushman and Wakefield, so there will be greater clarity of the options we are looking at. Thank you. So comments there from the seminary.
Well, isn't that interesting? Kind of tells me where they're going.
So Scott and Deborah are both in on the call remotely. That wasn't divine intervention, knowing that we're thinking of them.
Okay, so that actually is helpful, because now they're referencing they have bids from Cushman Wakefield for the property, or some piece of the property. So unless and until we have some informed discussion, we really are kind of at a standstill.
Does anyone else
Well,
want?
why don't we just postpone this until we can meet with some potential developer?
Well, that might be, it could be good.
Well, yeah,
It could be good if.
but I don't want to do
somebody
anything,
said,
I don't want to
I want to
see
buy.
our
the-"
colleagues here spend any more time until we have some idea about what this developer would like to do with the site.
Can we ask for John's feedback on that as well, given his previous comment about
Absolutely.
doing this in parallel or not?
Absolutely. How do you react to that, John?
Well, I think we've all learned a long time ago, you don't question people's motives. So I don't know. I would say if the seminary wishes to market the property or subdivide it as they see fit, they're certainly going to do so. I was under the impression that the goal here all along was a cooperative venture between the town and the seminary, and it may still well be. But I just don't know how the board crafts and town meeting adopts a bylaw that's antagonistic or not consistent with what the landowner wants. I mean, we've seen that before, but it's 2/3 vote at town meeting, very difficult if there's opposition, and something this complex that's so important for the town of Hamilton for so long. I don't see how to move forward if the landowner is not participating in the process. It leads to a potential really nasty result. And the other problem, and I know the board's experience with this, you don't want to go to town meeting unless you're sure, really sure, you've got not just 2/3, but you got 3/4 vote. And if the landowner is not participating, or at least not providing instructive advice, I don't know how the board has any sense of confidence. And that's just a dangerous process. Once defeated by town meeting, very hard to put it back on the table, especially after all this work. So I'm guardedly, perhaps naive, but I'm guardedly optimistic that perhaps when Dr. Barnes comes back, we can have a sit down with him on the development agreement side, and I can learn a little bit more and hopefully be helpful. But at this point, I don't see the benefit of the planning board pursuing a zoning bylaw as detailed as this one if the landowner is not responding to, we like this, we hate this, please change this. I think it's an exercise in potential futility.
I agree.
Well,
Yeah,
my
I was going to ask, does anybody have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, my position on this is, it's been such a strange process from the beginning, maybe the players, whatever. But typically what you would expect is a project getting narrower as you get closer to the end, more and more. This is just the opposite. Everything is exploding wider. So I frankly am at a point of futility, thinking, from my part, personally, any more work on this is pointless.
No, I agree, and you and
And,
Jonathan have poured your heart and soul into this.
Well, that's why I want to state unequivocally that.
And the chair.
That's from somebody who has put a lot of time into this project, thinking it out. I'm not the only one, obviously, but if you want my opinion on that, that's what I think this, Gordon Conwell has proven they are not partners in this at all, and I don't see any major change unless it's an act of desperation, but I just certainly don't see this happening before November, frankly. So if it does get pushed down the road, it's going to be the spring.
Hey, we've
That's
been
it.
working in good faith
Yeah.
to try and meet their, their accelerated schedule,
Yeah.
and they're gone. They're absent. They went AWOL on us, and it's like, I agree. We should not do anything until we get clarity.
Yeah, the development agreement is the biggest thing that I just cannot believe.
Right.
They are ignoring all of that, but.
We've been asking for the development agreement for months and months and months, and Marnie put a lot of work into the points that needed to be in that development agreement, and we have always been proceeding on the assumption that these would go hand in hand, and we've been tolerating the fact that it isn't hand in hand and it's lagging behind, and I think that's the end of the tolerance.
I don't know where the select board is in all of this. I have no idea what's going on them.
That's the other frustrating thing
It's
for me.
for me, the very frustrating thing that we're getting no support from them, as far as I know, except.
That's not by design. The select board,
Why aren't they not writing a development agreement like we're doing a plan? and
well, they're
submit it?
relying on John Witten's expertise, because
Yeah.
remember, the Board of Selectmen you think we're volunteers, they're volunteers. They have no knowledge or experience with zoning, building, bylaw development, enforcement of bylaws. They're worried about, water mains and, contracts for pickup of trash. So they're they're passive. They have engaged John Witten, who I think we all agree is, pretty impressive background, expertise, and knowledge to drive and guide that development agreement on their behalf, because they don't have the time, the focus, or the expertise. So I think that's what they're relying on. They are just standing back. I mean, there's an interesting dynamic here. We haven't experienced, but you don't want to, if they were on top of us, we'd be saying, get out of here, this is our purview. So it's like, you sort of got to let the boards, we're the only other elected board in town. We spent a lot of time and effort on this. They're just letting it play out and waiting for, advice and guidance from the planning board, and John Witten. And certainly if they get engagement with the seminary, they'll get some other, input, but they're not going to be actively engaged in this unless.
Madam Chair, if I could just, sorry, Rick, if I just spoke over you, I apologize. I not to politicize this at all, but I do want to defend the select board, at least the board members I've been working with and the town manager. The issue with a development agreement is it's a contract, so it's bargained for. So to protect the select board's good name, we're waiting on the bargaining. I think the select board has put forward, or at least through one of the board members and the town manager and myself, we've put forward ideas, but it's bargained for. It's not unilateral. We need a bilateral response. And short of that response, it's yelling into the wind. So that is the problem. It's not, in my experience, in this very narrow relationship I have with the town, it's not that the select board have checked out, just the opposite. I think we need a willing partner because it's contractual. If it were a zoning bylaw, yeah, you can always adopt a zoning bylaw without the landowner's assent. It's unilateral, you go to town meeting. But a development agreement is the beauty of it is it's negotiated. But you need two parties to negotiate. We only have one.
Well, I will say this. I will say that the planning board was encouraged by the select board to move forward on this overlay district. And the date of November 6th was selected with the idea that this overlay district would be completed by that date. And my recollection is that the town manager attempted to elicit promises from planning board members to work diligently to meet that deadline. The planning board has done that. Perhaps we should have had the discussion that we're having right now earlier and have saved ourselves a lot of time and effort on a document and maps and plans that may take up space in a renovated town hall in the future and then somehow get lost to posterity years and years from now. I can only speculate. So I think at this juncture, it really does not make much sense at all for the planning board to continue to try and refine a document that has not engendered much support, really, from the abutters. I mean, I think there's interest, but we hear concern from them, and obviously they're the most affected by any development on the site. But other than Mr. Davis, who lives in town, we haven't gotten a lot of feedback from anyone. So it really is time to reassess and think about the other things that we can put on the agenda and work on and go from there. So whether we want to take a formal motion, I don't know that that's actually necessary. I think we can just not put Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary on the agenda anymore until we hear from John Whitten or the Select Board that there's some type of interest that would permit us to move forward.
Patrick, did you have anything to say?
No, not necessarily. Maybe just to share something somebody told me a long time ago, which has helped, and is we try to control everything and then worry about the things that are already controlled and setting yourself up for a lifetime of misery. I kind of feel like we're in that situation here. But I think I was super encouraged. Like initially I was a little, weeks ago, hesitant and maybe skeptical about, but it wasn't until tonight and reviewing the plans and reading everything that I was very encouraged about what it was, because again, you go back to that sheet, it checks the boxes, I think, for a lot of people in the direction it was heading in the special permit process and then what's permitted and use and everything else. Some things to clarify still, obviously, but was going in a good direction, and I thought would be awesome for the town if supplemented by a strong development agreement. But until then, I agree, hold.
And just to clarify some things, I mean, that the planning board has always wanted to balance social and environmental and, I'm missing something. What was our? Societal needs.
Yeah.
And so our work has not been done for the benefit of the seminary. I think if it had been done for the benefit of the seminary, they would be here supporting us. So I think we have really been trying to act in the interest of the town. And so the town needs revenue, and so this was an opportunity to generate revenue, but in a way that honored the environment and addressed the concerns of abutters, hence the 100-foot buffer to the extent feasible, and all the landscaping provisions that are in here and whatnot. So we have really been trying to address the town's needs, recognizing that the seminary, as the landowner, obviously has a lot to say, and their mantra was flexibility, and hence we came up with this hybrid code. But that said, I think that our next agenda will not have Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary on it unless we hear news that would warrant reconsideration of a kind of a substantial pause in our work.
Maybe you can just put it on for an update, you know, if in terms of
From
from the, you know. from-
Well, John and I have been in communication. If there's any reason why we should put it on the agenda, you could advise me, because you'll be integral to any discussions between the select board and the seminary.
I will. I absolutely will.
Just one more comment from Scott Sundquist, since we've been talking, is that we believe the results of the external consultants and your good work has helped to inform developers who are talking to us now, and they're looking at your work as they talk about developing the property. So Scott's chimed in a few times. I don't know if you want to make an offer for Scott to speak.
Oh,
He
if
should
he
be
would
able
like
to, I
s-
think.
If he would like to speak, he's welcome to speak.
And I can make that allow. Yeah. So Scott, you should be allowed to speak if you want to.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Unfortunately, I'm on vacation in Jacksonville, Florida right now. It's been 95 degrees and very hot and sweaty. But I did take the time I've been following and reading all the materials. And we are quite open to engaging about this process. And I do want to tell you that even though there's been a lot of concern about our willingness to engage, we like a lot of these plans. And I think that when developers come and they put in these bids, they're looking at these plans. They go to the website and they look and they say, hey, that's the kind of thing that we would like to engage in, or they say, I'm not really that interested in the property. And so there are people coming in, as we've said from the very beginning, we will be staying on part of the property or we'll be leaving the property depending upon what the market allows. And so we're moving forward in that process. And once again, it's going to happen. We're going to have a pretty good idea of the interest in the property, what people want to buy, what they'd like to develop by the first or second week in September. So when that happens, we'll be in discussion with the planning board and the select board so that we're all on the same page of what's moving forward. And as I met last summer with Rick over breakfast and talked about this, I think we have a lot of the same goals. We want something that's going to look nice for the neighbors and for the town of Hamilton. And since we'll probably be living on part of this campus, we want it to be nice. And so as we move forward, we do need to be in dialogue together. And I'm more than willing to continue those discussions together about what this might look like. But again, I know it has been a lot of work and we really appreciate it. The plans are amazing. And so we thank you for taking the time to do that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sundquist. I appreciate those remarks. Does anyone else want to make any comments?
No, can we move on to other board business?
Right, I have just, we certainly want to go full steam ahead on stormwater management. And then just an idea, if planning board members would take a look at our draft overlay district and look at the special design process in 9.6.4.5. One thing we could consider is amending both the open space and farmland development bylaw and the senior housing bylaw to use the language that I have put together for this overlay district.
I 100% support that.
It eliminates all ambiguity.
Yes.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
I'll illuminate it.
That we amend the senior housing bylaw and the open space and farmland preservation development bylaw, which contains this special design process. It's set forth in both of those bylaws. And I studied that language, and the language that I used in the overlay district removes any ambiguity and contains requirements that these areas are delineated on a map. And these are the kinds of things that at a pre-application conference, everything is going to be much more crystal clear, and it can obviate the unanticipated problems resulting from language that is not actually as precise as it could be.
We will no longer get a debate from an applicant saying, I looked at the unprotected areas, and they're buried in my map, but I don't need to do anything about them. No, you have to draw them on a map, and then you have to design to them. That's what this says.
So does the reference?
Oh, Debbie, real quickly.
I'm sorry?
Never mind.
Does the citation in this reference OSFPD and the senior
Word for
housing?
word, just about.
Well, it doesn't specifically reference either of those two other bylaws, but it uses the same construct.
Right.
It just, you would have to
You
pull
want
up
to take the construct out of this and place it in there.
in those two bylaws, yes.
That's fine. I wouldn't waste time with OSFPD. Nobody's used it in 15 years, and nobody's ever going to use it.
But in the senior
That's
bylaw,
what-
it'd be really helpful.
Actually, that's exactly what John Witten said, and he said that's the reason they do it is because it's not mandatory. And so the language I used says,
That's
the
exactly-
applicant, as the first step in the design process, must. So the language in it, do the following, whereas in the
No,
other
I understand.
bylaws, it's not an absolute requirement.
Well, the reason it doesn't work is the incentives aren't, the economic incentives aren't there. The bonuses that they get, they look at it and go, well, this is an either or.
You'd adopt it for the senior bylaw, and then if it works for the senior bylaw, you just jam it into the other one, even if nobody ever uses it. It's low-hanging fruit. This is about the senior bylaw, not about,
Yeah, I agree.
not about 8.1. It's about
Right,
8.2.
I agree.
But that's an easy thing, because we've got the language.
Yes.
You can go ahead and do it. I mean, I'm just saying that whole bylaw needs to be jettisoned and.
Which one, the senior housing bylaw?
Oh, OSFPD.
Oh.
It's just a, it was a nice try 20 years ago, and it's just never worked.
No, this is about really fixing the senior housing
Oh, no,
bylaw.
I get it.
And to your point, Rick, I mean, I remember you once said, and I agree with you, that the easy peasy land in Hamilton is gone, and the remaining land that is getting developed or could be developed is more problematic. It's not
Yeah.
flat and
No,
level, I
I'm-
mean.
Yep, no, I'm not arguing, I'm just saying, my comment was regarding OSFPD.
Okay, well, that's one thing we can do, and we can actually then notice it out, and we could put it on the agenda for the fall town meeting.
So, we're kind of, we're in this hiatus until we learn, it sounds like it's gonna be a month before we get any clarity from the seminary on potential developer bids. But we could be right back at this in a month.
Right,
I'm not sure we're gonna have time to get this done for town meeting, so we can.
oh, this amending the senior housing?
Oh, no.
No,
The overlay district.
no, I doubt it.
So.
I doubt it. I mean, I would be surprised. I don't know if John Witten's still on the,
No, I politically,
Oh.
you hit the nail on the head, and John Witten did as well. I like the fact that, we're actually talking to a lawyer that thinks politically and strategically about how things get done in town government. You hit the nail on the head, is the abutters are not on board yet, and they won't be until there's a development agreement, until they see ironclad. And Jake's comment about the traffic study is not a bad one.
oh, absolutely.
We agree 100%. I think the whole board agrees with that.
Absolutely, and the
So-
whole thing about an appraisal, I mean, but the planning board has no money to
No,
get one.
no,
but,
I understand.
that-
So,
We don't have
Town
the
paid
funds.
$70,000 or whatever to the consultants before.
so, no, I mean,
Traffic study's
that
$10,000.
money can be found, but we're not gonna do that until we have clarity. Until there's very substantial clarity as to where this is going, if it's going anywhere. Then we can figure out the pieces to make it work, if their elements are, aligned the right way. So I think we can address that, and that would go a long way, if this goes forward, if we can make those things happen, and you say, okay, we've looked at the traffic, we've established the patterns, we know the volume, we know the routes, we know the roadways, that's the level of surety that would make everybody more comfortable.
Oh, absolutely, and I think the other big issue is wastewater treatment center. I mean, I remember from the Abramson report, that treatment center it's not ancient, but it's certainly
Well, it's probably,
dated.
probably in need of
Yeah,
capital upgrades.
But,
Right.
that's not, because keep in mind, any modification to anything connected upstream to that is gonna require a re-permit application process with the DEP, and they look at everything.
Right,
So it's like,
That'll be automatic.
that will be automatic.
right.
and that's expensive?
It can't,
The engineering might be expensive.
What's that?
no comment.
The engineering might be expensive.
Well, but by failing to do it, it can be expensive.
Well, they have to do it.
You have to do it, it's a
They have to do
requirement.
it. You wouldn't get a building permit.
Yeah.
It's required.
But I'm looking at, the kind of the whole site, what the existing treatment facility can handle versus what's anticipated.
That's the kind of stuff they ask.
Okay, so the other thing, I'll just throw this out.
Sewage treatment on his plant.
Emil, you'll love this.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Sewage
Is,
from the theological seminary, 400 feet above him.
we may be back into this, and so we won't have time or energy for this, but the other thing to think about is the Winthrop School site, 14 acres, form-based code.
That's the biggest project, not Gordon Conwell.
Yeah, no, I mean,
whole downtown.
because
Yeah.
it's coming,
Yeah.
and we have an opportunity to,
The legwork here is useful.
yeah.
Well, that was the point of
Well,
doing
it's
this.
sort of, yes, it's actually, it will inform that whole process. That the board is already up to speed, so it has a knowledge of that. The Board of Selectmen is chomping at the bit. They want that to happen. So the stars are aligned to make that happen. So that's something that everybody, at least on this side, can agree to. And politically, it won't happen unless we have a real form-based code or some hybrid of form-based code, because the neighbors are gonna wanna see the same thing
Sure.
in terms of what's going there.
I think we need the new 75-person meeting space before we tackle that agenda. 'Cause that will get a lot of attention from the
Well,
town.
the form-based code,
That's very true, because another thing we gotta think about is, in September, and Patrick, you know this better than I, the town is vacating this space, right?
yeah.
Somewhere September, October? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where we're meeting, it could be, I guess, the library?
Could be the library, could be the middle school.
Oh,
Winthrop.
yeah, okay.
So anyhow, the form-based code, it doesn't require any change to existing structures. It's,
No.
so,
No, because we assume that's gone.
So you
oh,
mean-
no, but I'm talking
you mean
about
non-conform-
elsewhere in town.
You mean non-conforming property? No, there are ways to deal with non-conforming
Well,
property.
so we're talking at cross purposes. You're talking about
Oh.
the form-based code for the Winthrop School only.
Oh,
Emil's talking about a
The whole
form-based
downtown.
code for the entire downtown.
At a time.
well, no, you can't do it though, Rick, that way. You gotta do the whole thing, and then only develop part of it.
Yeah,
Well,
They want, people want to see success. When they see success, you chart your future for success. Try it for the whole town,
not the,
No, not the whole
not the whole
town.
the
town.
downtown.
No, you're never gonna get it for the
well,
whole
Yeah,
thing.
well,
yeah.
Route 1A,
Yeah.
Route 1A.
Not even.
Just saying that's biting off a big one.
What I think you'd see,
Nothing
not to
would
get,
happen for years. there,
not,
Rick.
not to get too deep into it, but I think I've mentioned before, the instant you talk about Winthrop School, it engages that whole intersection on all four sides.
Oh, I know.
So that's a piece, that's a chunk. Yes, you could leave a gap from there and do downtown later, but you have to go a little bit into the,
Oh, yeah.
into the system.
You pick what's reasonable and works to make that whole thing work.
Yep. So, Madam Chair, should we hit October minutes really quickly?
Yeah. I see, ooh, my goodness, look at the
Time
time.
flies.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It does. Okay, let
We
me,
have September too.
Yeah, September and October.
September 20th.
so, let's just hit September 20th first. Anybody have any problems with September 20th?
No.
Right.
No, I looked through it.
I can change the
Notebook.
spelling of my
Mr.
name.
Davis, you left your notebook.
Jack?
is your name spelled wrong on
Yep.
September 20th?
Yep.
Oh,
Jonathan got shorted a lot of E's.
Yeah. So, and then on page 14, middle of the page, it should say elucidate environmentally sensitive site design, not just environmentally site design.
it should say what?
Environmentally sensitive site design. The word sensitive is missing between environmentally and site. Middle of the page, first bullet, page 14,
Are you on, which date are you on?
September. Page 14, September.
Is it in the italicized section?
Maybe I've got an old document here. Maybe it's been fixed.
I think
So-
I think you might have an old one. Look at the handout that,
Oh, it's fixed, sorry.
right, I
I
actually.
have an old document.
I actually went through this document,
Sorry.
so it should probably be.
Much better,
Pretty
yep.
correct. And if I saw your name spelled as poor, I do find and replace. and
Okay, then I have no
replace it.
I have no comments on September.
Okay. Did you see anything on September 20th?
No.
Okay, so,
Madam Chairman, I make the motion that we approve the meeting minutes of September 20th, 2022.
do I have a second?
Second.
When I call your name, please indicate that you agree. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Porter, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So now we can look at October 11th.
So again, I may have an old document, but let's see if we can navigate through it. Do you have a newer one there? Page 5, middle bullet, the, should say 1,650, not 16,150
Okay,
linear feet.
Hold hard, I'm going to,
5.
Or maybe I'm,
We got
It's still 16,150.
5,
page 5.
4, 5.
oh, it's in here.
Okay.
So it'd be on page 5, yeah. In the middle of the bullet list.
Right,
Yep,
6,
1,650, not 16,150 linear feet.
1,650.
650. There's an extra one in there. Okay. And that occurs twice.
On page number 4, the previous page, Jonathan's last name was lacking an E.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all the way through here, if that hasn't been corrected, yeah, so. And then on the next, let's see, page 7, let me look at the bills here. Let's go to 7. Yeah, so it says, again, my name's spelled wrong. Mr. Poor also focused on the 20 to 25-foot sheer ledge, not 20 to 20-foot.
20 to
And that's twice. Beginning of the paragraph, end of the paragraph. And then Mr. Wheaton, that's hard to read, that comments by Mr. Wheaton, section, it should have some dots in there, 8.2 point something, 3.13 or 31.3. Same page, 7. Anybody seeing it?
Yeah, there's also, it seems like there was meant to be a
82,
continuation of a sentence that,
8.2 point.
I don't know which it is. I don't know where the dots
Yes,
belong.
there's no section 82,000.
Right,
Must be 8.2.
0.31.3, I bet. Is that findings?
you could not make the final.
Yeah, it's a
Actually,
finding.
can I just clarify here? I started, oh, wait, this is the wrong date. I'm sorry. I started to go through those minutes from October. Oh, right. Sep- October 11th.
I don't have my bylaw here Anybody have a bylaw they can look at to figure out what finding that might
Actually,
be?
I looked at this, and I just had an X through everything. I wasn't able to amend these minutes, but I tried to just go through with a pen, and for some reason, I just took this whole thing out, and I can't remember why. Maybe because it wasn't that critical. This was the meeting where we reviewed the decision in 133.
Right.
And so I don't know how critical it is to have
Fine.
every little piece of information.
Just some of those numbers, were like the 16,000
Yeah.
was orders of magnitude different from 1,000.
Oh, and it's 8.2.31.3, just
Okay.
so everyone knows, because I got,
So maybe it's not important.
yeah, I got so far, and then I.
Those were the only substantive things that I saw.
Well, if we were to go ahead and approve them with those changes, I had a lot more changes, but they were more stylistic than anything else. And it may be, Patrick, if you tell Joan to go through and correct Jonathan's name and make the other changes, and also correct the section number, 8.2 point, what did I say it was?
31.3?
31.3.
So you're going to resubmit them, and they'll come back again?
Yeah, I mean, she could make those changes, and then we could approve them. Or if no one else has any changes, we can approve them subject to her making those corrections.
There is one item here, next to last paragraph, at the top of it, on page 8. It says, parentheses, note, not sure who the "they" is in this paragraph. Could be the select board or the abutters.
Oh,
Yeah, we need to clean that up.
page 8, hold on.
I would think that us, meaning the planning board.
I think it's referring to Abramson.
Okay.
Yes, it probably is. Rick, it was you speaking.
From the paragraph above, there's another "they" there.
You know, it may be worthwhile for me to go through these, because I'm looking at, there are just so many mistakes in here. I mean, they're really like, in other business, the first paragraph, Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, the theological seminary is not capitalized. I will endeavor to go through these at some point if we can just, we won't put this on the agenda till I have it done, and it might take a while, but there was a lot of capitalization issues. I just have lots of corrections here. So I have this as a Word document, so I can go through it. And in Joan's defense, this is when she just started, so she didn't recognize some of the people who were speaking. And, you know, it was her first foray into this, and she was essentially, I think, trying to transcribe too much. So I think that rather than approve something with just the barest of corrections, we should probably endeavor to do a good job on this, particularly, you know, in the event these minutes from October 11th ever became critical in litigation. So we've approved one set. So do we have any other board business?
We need to determine the date of our next meeting. We had scheduled September the 5th, and the Board of Selectmen have chosen, because of the Labor Day holiday, to have their meeting on the 5th. So I'll throw out on the table the possibility of us meeting on the 7th, which would be Thursday of that week.
That'd be okay with me.
So move it to the 7th?
Yeah, that actually works better for me than the 5th.
Okay, and let's do stormwater management. Is that good, Pat?
Sure.
Because I think we're
I didn't-
close on that.
Yeah, we are. I have to. Yes, we can do it then.
But today, it's I think enough time that we can study everything that was done. And Alex gave us a pretty good overview. He seems very pleased with the bylaw. Now, does that have to be on the warrant, the change to the general bylaw?
Yes, it would.
Okay, so let's get that on the warrant. And so if we do the amendment to the senior housing bylaw and stormwater management, the town meeting for November 6th is not wasted. Does the select board have any other items on the agenda for that date? Do you know?
I think they were going to be having budget discussions, or a budget vote for some of the town hall expenditures.
Oh, okay, so it is something that will add to the justification for having the special town meeting. So if anybody has any other ideas for amending bylaws, this would be the time. And I'm no longer on the Affordable Housing Trust, but when I was chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, I tried to I had an initiative to amend the inclusionary housing bylaw specifically to address those provisions that required a town council to provide an assessment of their meaning. So there was some ambiguity in that language, and so the Affordable Housing Trust has the benefit of town council's opinions as to how the language should be amended, but I also had them looking at other bylaws from other towns with respect to inclusionary housing, but what they've done, I'm not sure, but I can reach out to them and ask them if they have anything that would be, that they could report to the planning board, and we in turn could consider having amendments on the warrant with respect to that. Now, that's really up in the air. I'd have to talk to Jamie Knudsen.
Is the warrant still open, Patrick?
It is not,
Yeah, I thought it had closed already.
Oh, the warrant's closed already?
yeah.
Oh, so
I
we,
think it was Monday of last week.
so we can't get stormwater management on there?
Nope. Next April.
Well, we may be having some short meetings. No.
Sorry, just for clarity on what's left to be done, the bylaw is in a good place, and Alex did a lot of good work there too, but the rules and regs was
Yeah.
still left up, and I wasn't sure if that's, like, what is the process for that?
Rules and regs is a public hearing that we can do
Okay,
on our own.
okay.
So the bylaw's ready to go?
Almost, it's too bad we
And
missed
when is the
warrant.
closing date?
The
Already
warrant's
passed.
closed.
Can we wiggle?
I don't think so.
You could ask Mary Ellen, and I want to be there for that guy.
Well, the warrant book is one thing, but it's the notice that's more critical, isn't it?
I don't know.
Is it publishing the warrant book that causes the warrant to close? Because,
That's a lot of it, yes.
So there's no wiggle room on that, because we would have plenty of time with respect to notice, but if the warrant closed, we couldn't have put the overlay district on the agenda for November 6th if we wanted to, right?
It looks like that.
Wasn't there a placeholder on?
Oh, was there a placeholder? Oh,
I
okay,
think there
sorry.
was a
Okay, there was a
placeholder.
placeholder.
Can we use the placeholder to substitute?
Well, Patrick, could you just,
question.
if we could get a placeholder for the warrant for stormwater management, because we're in pretty good shape on that, I think.
The bylaw's in great shape, the rules and regs. need
But it
work,
doesn't
though.
matter.
Doesn't
I mean,
matter,
we
yeah.
want to get the general bylaw done first, the rules and regs. We can work on that, and as soon as they're done, we can have the hearings on that. Every
Just
time it
actually read it,
rains,
I'm
I want
wondering
to
if-
drive down Bridge Street.
I wonder if the rules and regs could achieve somewhat of our goal and eliminate some risk for the stormwater bylaw getting on for April then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
if that's
yeah.
all we need, the rules and regs might be in a place where we could address the concerns we had
Yeah, that's a good
in
thought.
some way.
So we put a placeholder in for April.
I think that's,
Stormwater.
for the bylaw, we can update the rules and regs between now and then.
Yeah, I mean, once the bylaw is approved and approved by the Attorney General, the regs, we can notice them out immediately.
No, I
Well, I
think
guess I'm
what you're
saying do it
suggesting-
beforehand.
Just do the rules
Oh,
and
do the
now.
regs
Now.
first. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that works, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's run that by Alex, to make sure it makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't want regs referring to something that's not in existence, if you will.
All right. Do you want me to ask
Or run that
that?
by him, just ask him whether that's a viable
I can ask that.
option.
Madam Chair,
Yes, you make a motion to adjourn?
how did you know?
Oh, it was your posture.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Okay, when I call your name, we'll vote. So Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye?
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Good night, Matt.
Bye.
Good night, everyone. See you soon.
Good night.